Hello all. Hope you're all doing well. We are waiting for Benny Boy to join us, which I'm sure he will do very soon. Hello, Ben.
Hello.
How are you, sir?
How are you doing? Good.
Praise the Lord. Baruch Hashem, doing well. How's your Purim?
My Purim was good. It was a hot Purim. It all went
Hot
well.
Purim as in like it was
The weather,
like I got you. Okay.
not from any symbolic or spiritual sense.
Did you hear any interesting Purim Torah?
Did I hear anything interesting part of Torah?
You have like rabbis crying and you like yelling out Torah. Maybe like you heard something that was like very interesting.
I'm trying to think. I might have to think about it, about the Megillah specifically.
Was it a silent read or like a kid friendly read?
It was. I mean, there were two, but there was also a silent read, but which is good. And the Chabad has. They don't do. I was in a Chabad place, so they don't go crazy every time a man is mentioned. Only at specific points.
Yeah, gotcha.
But yeah, I have to think about it.
I'm
Every time that I need to think through the past recently, it takes time because there's so many things that are happening.
So much is happening. Yeah, it's good. I mean, protests in Jerusalem today, Iran being threatened, peace with Russia and Ukraine. Who knows? Crazy times. Indeed. Speaking of time, also last week, if anyone doesn't know, the reason we didn't do this because you guys, daylight savings, the clocks have been changed in the States, but they haven't here, so the schedules, we weren't simpatico, but I think we're back at it right now. Yeah, and thinking back to the past, it's hard. Time definitely feels like it's accelerating. But I feel like that's a good thing. I feel like we're building towards something.
Yeah.
I hope
so too.
Okay, we are in the 6th chapter.
Yes. Yeah, and you mentioned the 6th chapter is a chapter that is in somehow distinct, or like from now on, it's like
From now on till the end, it's more like annexes to the 5 that we just read right now. Specifically in this one, tough, we're gonna see, but this is really, it's sort of exploring evil inclination in a certain sense.
Right. Okay. Interesting.
Gilad is joining us. This one, sometimes you learn in merit of, right? Like, so obviously we of course are going in merit of all the hostages. May they be returned home safely and without any unnecessary trauma. But also, since there is political turmoil as well, we are hoping the citizens of Israel, at least, maybe citizens of the world, because it affects the world. We're all hoping, obviously, that there'll be a resolution, a clearing of the minds. I don't know how that what the constellation of that is, but we hope for better political leadership, please God, specifically in Israel and anywhere in the world where people are looking for proper leadership. So from our lips to God's ears, please God, may we have that. I think that was safe politically. I didn't make any too intense any statements right now. Okay, so let's get cracking.
Yes, sir.
Okay. אמרו הפילוסופים שהמשה בנפשו אף על פי שעושה המעשים הטובים והחשובים, הוא עושה אותם והוא מתהווה אל הפעולות הרעות ונחשף אליהן. ויכבוש את יצרו ויחלוק עליו פעולותיו על מה שהעירו אליו כוחותיו ותאוותו ותכונת נפשו, ויעשה הטובות והוא מצטער בעשייתם וניזוק. אבל החסיד הוא שנמשך בפעולתו אחר מה שתראהו תאוותו ותכונתו, ויעשה הטובות והוא מתהווה ונחשף אליהן. Let's stop there.
Okay.
Take it away.
So this chapter is concerning the difference between the saintly or highly ethical, the chassid, and him who subdues his passion and has self-restraint, which is on a lower level. Philosophers maintain that though the man of self-restraint performs moral and praiseworthy deeds, yet he does them desiring and craving all the while for immoral deed, but subduing his passions and actively fighting against a longing to do those things to which his faculties, his desires, and his psychic disposition excite him, succeeds, though with constant vexation and irritation, in acting morally. The saintly man, however, is guided in his action by that which his inclination and disposition prompt him, in consequence of which he acts morally from innate longing and desires.
Right, that's very exactly. Okay. Okay, so we'll get back. We'll discuss the Chassid and the Kovesh in a moment.
Moshe.
What did you call the Kovesh?
Moshe benafsho.
No, I know. I'm saying how do you say this in English?
One has subdues and self-restraint.
Okay, the Kovesh sounds. I like Kovesh more. Okay, so we're basically
He doesn't call him Kovesh. He calls him Moshe benafsho.
Well, but
no, he's calling him Moshe benafsho, but the reference is Ezehu Gibor HaKovesh et Yitzro. That's this, but the reference I'm doing to myself for a second.
Okay.
Well, he calls he actually calls him the two things here, which is Kovesh et Yitzro ve'Moshel benafsho. So it's like Kovesh and Moshel, and two separate things. So it's interesting.
I think, yeah, if we're opening that up, I think there is a difference between Moshe benafsho and specifically Yichbosh et Yitzro. Right? Moshe benafsho is more inclusive, right? There is Yetzer, but the nefesh has more than just Yetzer. So it's I think it's following Aristotle or Plato. Maybe I'm not sure which one, with the model of the psyche that has the man, the lion, and the monster. And you need to.
No.
I'm not sure. Maybe it's Aristotle. It seems like Aristotle, but it might be Plato. I'm just not sure. So saying that the monster is the one that you need to tame. The lion is the one you need to train, and the man is the one you need to educate, right? So those are the three parts of the psyche. So I think
right, and I think Plato also has the chariot, right? And there's two horses that you're there's the man in the chariot that's riding, which I can't remember exactly, but maybe that's the intellect. But then there's two horses, and one of them is maybe corresponds more to the physical, and then there's another one. So I probably need to look at something to bring it fully. Well, yeah, it looks like somebody in the comments is mentioning that specifically. But I think it's probably also connected here.
Okay. So, whether it's Plato or with Aristotle, Rambam is clearly engaging with ideas that are out there at the time to be checked. But all right. So first of all, we have to look at evil as not as right. We also spoke about this earlier in other chapters, but it's not an external force, right? It's not separate. It's not a separate force within our personality. It's in us, right? It's integral. You could say it's encompassing all our I would say, let's say, our natural desires, right? So whether it's eating or whether it's sexual urges, these are still things that it's all a part of it. So you could say, in a certain sense, that it's being seen as it really represents our attachment to the natural world in a certain sense, which is like we call it the evil inclination, but that's sort of our us wanting to connect to this natural world. And Maimonides, with his derech ha'emtza, with his middle of the road, obviously wants to create like a balanced, who's joining us right now, Andrew. Hello, Andrew. You're welcome to join as well, right? So he's looking for a balanced integration of all these things, which he'll believe will lead to proper spiritual growth, right? And you could even say that like an excess of spiritual inclinations is also a problem, right? You don't want to be necessarily too spiritual. And if you look at it that way, the Yetzer Hara is really, in that sense, like if you're too connected to, or there's an excess of spiritual inclination, I need the Yetzer Hara, or the love of nature, or you could call it touching grass or being grounded, is really connecting us to this world, right? So this goes back to the idea that we're talking about evil being sort of on a spectrum, which is like it really matters how it's being used, how we're dealing with this, right? So if you look at someone from even from a psychological state, like if you are lacking any evil inclination, I would say that person is in danger, right? Because you have to have some sort of integration of whether it's the shadow or the monster, but like that is something that we have inside us, but we have to figure out how to balance that ultimately. Rav Nachman, which obviously the Rambam is not talking about, but he had he talks about how when God in Genesis is creating man, Vayetzer Hashem Elohim et Adam. There is a double yud over there. The letter itself is a double yud, and he says that this is talking about two of the inclinations that we need to be focusing on, right? It's not only one, but God created both of these things inside us, obviously. And it really matters how we act. Are we only acting based on these desires? Then we're at risk of sin. But if I'm looking at this as part of an integrated picture, then I'm not necessarily going to risk sin. And we clearly see that our Christian brothers and sisters, right, with Paul, he has a different way of looking at the inclination, right? He inherently saw that as like a fundamental flaw, right? That you have the Yetzer Hara, and the only way you could actually overcome this or have self-redemption was going to be through divine intervention. In the Christian sense, this would obviously be the death of Jesus, which I would claim this is obviously a more pessimistic perspective. And I would say that in contrast, our sages, Chazal, are really emphasizing the balance, right? And another verse we would have for that is right? Love your God with all your heart, with all your soul. And here too, our rabbis have talked about this, that the right? The fact that you're loving with all your heart, it's also with the evil inclination and the good inclination. Now we call them evil and good, and that has many ramifications with how we think about things. But when we use, again, the term evil over here, we shouldn't be looking at it as necessarily bad, but it becomes evil when it gets out of balance. Thoughts, comments, complaints?
First of all, it's I didn't know that like view of Yetzer Hara is related to that. I read this. This is a section of Rambam that I read quite deeply with the Chavruta that I had.
What we're doing now?
Yeah, this
Gotcha.
specifically chapter 6, and if we're talking, for instance, in Vervaeke's terms, then the Rambam is it's not Vervaeke, it's Plato, really, but popularized today by Vervaeke. He's talking about self-restraint versus sophroson, because the Chassid is what Aristotle sees as sophroson, which is mean you are tempted by the good. So when you let yourself go and you follow your desires, no inhibitions, the thing that tempts you is to do good. And I think
The thing that tempts you is
I mean,
to do
something
good.
precedes that, no?
what?
Something has to precede that. It's not like
Sure.
the natural.
No, you're not born Hasid. I think that's
Right.
generally
Yeah.
the thing.
That
Like
was
if,
my understanding, yeah.
but it's I think there's a phrase, I don't remember who, it's one of the Christian saints, I think, who said, like, love God and then do what you want, or something like that. Like once you're oriented so pristinely towards in your character and in the way that you're engaging with the world, then there's no conflict, there's no need for self-restraint and governing and conquering yourself and your yetzo, but rather there is a harmony, right? Doing good is what you are tempted to do. It's the thing that calls out to you, and so like, and I think like an example, right? If you see someone struggling and you feel called to do it, and it's not like, even though let's say it costs you something at the moment that it happens, the self-restraint would be, I don't want to help this, like I'm too busy, I don't have time for this, but okay, I understand that this is the right thing to do and I'm going to do it. Whereas the Hasid is like, there's like very little gap between seeing or like having this thing happen and just doing it because it's clear, like there's no moment of like frustration or conflict within that. And I think this also resonates with something that Iris Murdoch talks about in The Sovereignty of Good. It's a collection of her philosophical works that also sort of points at the same thing, that like we typically don't have these moments of choice when we need to govern our soul and then make a decision. St. Augustine. But rather, most of our life is automatic. Most of the time, we act as we have been trained to act, and when we are properly oriented, then we can be good people through that.
This reminds me a little of the discussion we had in earlier chapters. The terms are a little, we're playing a little loose with the terms, but the way the Ramchal sees it is, let's say the Kadosh or the Hasid is one level, which actually needs to detach from the world, right? Because he's in a place where like, I need to get to this holy place and I can't integrate with these things where seemingly my evil inclination won't be able to handle, right? So I decide to go into the cave. And then he says the Kadosh is someone that could fully integrate, right? The Kadosh is someone that comes back and says like, I could hang out here and do this and drink this and do that. We speak about this obviously with the Nazir, right? The Nazirite, right? When he does his vow, when he comes, he has to bring a sin offering because he denied himself. He couldn't fully integrate, right? So yes, you've reached a certain level of holiness because of that, but ultimately there was a larger integration that could have been happening.
Just on the terms thing, I think the if we're technical, I think what the Rambam is saying is the term is like hameule is better than hachasid, or hachasid hameule is better, like just to separate it from what others call
right.
it.
Correct. I mean, he
hameule versus hamosher ben nafsho is the way I saw this. Put one against the other.
so as many things, like the Rambam is also playing over here, specifically here, he's also playing with like other ideas, right? Like we're going to get into the next portion, and like he is playing with these topics, like whether it's kovesh or whether it's chassid, because he he's not in a vacuum, right? He's dealing with obviously other ideas that are out there. But let's continue, unless Ben, you have any thoughts, or Andrew, you have any thoughts? By the way, I'm insulted that you're not eating right now, because like if you're on screen, the expectation
I already
is
finished.
I
You're
see.
too late, Hezi.
Okay. Let's bוא נמשיך.
Yep. Let's do it. Here.
ובהסכמה מן הפילוסופים שהחסיד יותר חשוב ויותר שלם מן המשה בנפשו, אבל אמרו שהמשה בנפשו כחסיד בעניינים רבים, ומעלתו למטה ממנו בהכרח להיותו מתהווה לפועל הרע, אף על פי שאינו עושה אותו, מפני שתשוקתו לרע היא תכונה רעה בנפש. וכבר אמר, I'm missing you here, yeah, okay.
You want to go
כבר אמר שלמה המלך, כיוצא בזה, נפש רעה אותו רעה. ואמר בשמחת החסיד ובמעשה הטוב, והצטער מי שאינו צדיק בעשייתה. זה המאמר. שמחה לצדיק עשות משפט ומחייתה לפועלי הון. אבל. זה הנראה מדברי הנביאית נאות, למה שזכרהו הפילוסופים, וכאשר חקרנו דברי חכמים בזה, העניין נמצא להם, שהמתהווה לעבירות ונחשף אליהן, הוא יותר חשוב ויותר שלם, מאשר לא יתהווה אליהן ולא יצטער בהנחתן. עד שאמרו, שכל אשר יהיה האדם יותר חשוב ויותר שלם, תהיה תשוקתו לעבירות והצטערותו בהנחתן יותר גדול. והביאו בזה הדברים ואמרו, כל הגדול מחברו, יצרו גדול ממנו. ולא די עם זה, עד שאמרו ששכר המשה בנפשו גדול לפי רוב צערו במשול בנפשו, ואמרו, לפום צערה אגרא. We learned this also in Avot, oh yeah, correct, in Avot. ויותר מזה שהם ציוו להיות האדם מתהווה לעבירות. והזהירו מלומר, שאני בטבעי לא אתהווה לזאת העבירה, ואף על פי שלא אסרה התורה. והוא אמרם, רבן שמעון בן גמליאל, אומר, לא יאמר אדם, אי אפשר לאכול בשר וחלב, אי אפשר ללבוש שעטנז, אי אפשר לבוא על הערווה, אלא אפשר. ומה אעשה? אבי בשמיים גזר עליי. Take us, Ben.
Okay. Philosophers. Where are they? Here you go. Philosophers unanimously agree that the latter is superior to and more perfect than the one who has to curb his passions, meaning the chassid, the mawla. Although they add that it is possible for such a one to equal the saintly man in many regards. In general, however, he must necessarily be ranked lower in the scale of virtue because there lurks within him the desire to do evil. And though he does not do it, yet because his inclinations are all in that direction, it denotes the presence of an immoral psychic disposition. King Solomon also entertained the same idea when he said, the soul of the wicked desires evil. And in regard to the saintly man's rejoicing in doing good, and the discontent experienced by him who is not innately righteous when required to act justly, he says, it is bliss to the righteous to do justice, but torment to the evildoer. This is manifestly an agreement between scripture and philosophy. When, however, we consult the rabbis on this subject, it would seem that they consider him who desires inequity and craves for it, but does not do it, more praiseworthy and perfect than the one who feels no torment or at refraining from evil. And they even go as far as to maintain that the more praiseworthy and perfect a man is, the greater is his desire to commit iniquity, and the more irritation does he feel at having to desist from it. This they express by saying, whosoever is greater than his neighbor has likewise greater evil inclinations. Again, as if this were not sufficient, they even go as far as to say that the reward of him who overcomes his evil inclination is commensurate with the torture occasioned by his resistance, which thought they express by the words, according to the labor is the reward from Avot. Furthermore, they command that man should conquer his desires, but they forbid one to say, I, by my nature, do not desire to commit such and such transgression, even though the law does not forbid it. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel summed up this thought in the words, man should not say, I do not want to eat meat together with milk. I do not want to wear clothes made of a mixture of wool and linen. I don't want to enter into an incestuous marriage. But he should say, I do indeed want to, yet I must not, for my Father in heaven has forbidden it.
My mind is swinging. So, as he mentions over here, and like as we're going to explore right now, there's this central question, right? Which is, how does one, contend with one's desire or the evil inclination, right? And we live in we could talk about this ideal reality, but in reality, actually, there's desires, and the world actually isn't inherently balanced, right? So I can't walk into this and be this mu'uleh person because I have these issues. So are we being led astray by these inclinations, right? Or am I strong enough to come up from the other side, right? Like I see it, I hear it, but like I still can handle this ultimately. And
I don't think it's exactly what this passage.
No, we're just starting the passage. The machloket is obviously between. We don't have to call him the kovesh. We could call him the yes, the kovesh, and we don't have to say the chassid. We could say the me'uleh, but here he's using the term as far as the chassid, which is it more about, and this is what Maimonides is distinguishing. Is it the chassid who has no desire for evil, really? Or is it the kovesh who manages to actually conquer his evil inclination, right? He wants to do that, but like he manages to come up from the other side.
Which one is more virtuous of the two?
That's the machloket.
Yeah.
That's what we're going to see, right? So you could say that the philosophers are favoring the concept of the chassid or the me'uleh, right? Because they're saying that conquering the inclination is still, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but from my understanding of it, that even if you conquer it, there's still an implication of an internal struggle, which is a negative, right? Like you couldn't fully be integrated because you still have to struggle with this thing and you have to overcome it, and that's great, and we think you're awesome. Nevertheless, that little sound is over there, right? And then he's quoting Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, which is that like that the soul, a soul that's wanting evil is obviously is flawed, right? Now, Rambam is bringing over here Chazal, right? Our sages have they value the kovesh more, right? They think that, and they give us the example over here of the Pumtzar Agra. This is really a reference to the story of Abaye. Abaye, how does the story go? He overheard a conversation between a man and a woman that they're going to travel together. I think either they're not married or one of them was married, but the point is that like he thought they're going to sin, and he starts traveling he's following them and traveling after them, and at some point they get to their destination and they don't transgress, basically. And then he realizes that he's very disturbed by this because if he was in their situation, he'd feel like he wouldn't be able to handle himself. That's what his assumption was, that they're definitely going to sin, because he's thinking how I'm going to handle it, right? And that's where we come, and then he hears a heavenly voice, the Pum Sara Agra, right? So like the reward is proportionate to the amount of effort or struggle that you put inside. So Chazal was always, we could look at this as being, this is what they truly think. You could also look at this as like a mechanism, because, humans are obviously dealing with very hard times. So we want to make sure that we could package it nicely for them as well. And Maimonides also ends with mentioning over here, Rav Gamliel, right? Like you just said, which is, don't walk in saying like, no, I joked around. The Zohar has a comment about like women. It's something about women looking like monkeys, right? No one should take this out of context. Women are beautiful or amazing. I joke around sometimes with people. I'm like, listen, ever since I got married, all women in my life, they just like anyone else. I don't know if they're good looking, not good looking. They just all look like, like I don't even see a face. They all look like monkeys. It's a joke. What Rabbi Gamliel is saying is like, no, all these women look fantastic and they look hot. However, I tell myself, no, I'm not going to do this because I'm not allowed to do this, right? I'm being told that I need to control myself. So we obviously see this tension between the, we'll call them the philosophical ideals, let's say, and more the practical suggestions of Chazal, of our sages, and we have to figure out how we're going to resolve it.
Well, I'm wondering what lies, I guess, it might be obvious, but I'm trying to kind of, what lies behind Chazal stating this, or trying to emphasize that you should, right? So the Chassid is almost like you can view the world in two ways. One is that you can somehow deny. I mean, if we use the example, we can use another example that doesn't seem too controversial, but deny the beauty of the women around you, which could be maybe the way of the Chassid, but maybe in his sense, he's not denying anything, right? But from a Chazal position, it seems like maybe they're saying you don't want to deny, you want to incorporate or deal with it. You know what I'm saying? I'm just trying to understand.
I think.
Sorry, go ahead.
I think the notion is, the way I see it, closer to sort of like not having the ability or inclination to do evil is not a virtue in itself, right? So if you're not put, like if you're not put in a position, let's say, where if we're talking about women, where women are in any way interested in you, then like the fact that you didn't cheat on your wife is less impactful, right? Like you didn't have the option. So like there was never a situation where that came up. And I think it's similar with evil inclination. Like let's say you have power that you could use to manipulate people. You know something that you could use to gossip about people. And all of these things, they sort of pull at you. And then you are tested, right? Like, and then I think in a sense, there's something of that in there. And I think it also goes to something that I think Maimonides sort of deals with. It's kind of like the more powerful one's psyche is, then the more struggles that creates internally, right? If you're highly intelligent and you don't have the tools to deal with that, like you will drive yourself crazy, and many people do go crazy that are very intelligent. And I think this is sort of what it's pointing to.
Right. So I'm trying to like ask a different question of like, what's the axiom that makes Chazal reach this conclusion and the philosophers to reach the other conclusion? So my assumption is that the reason for that is because in Judaism, evil is not separate from the good. So we call it evil maybe because we have to, because it's how it appears to us, and maybe it's because of how the philosophers talk about it. So it's easier for just the common people, or like all of us, to really call it evil. But really it's not. But really, in a sense, it's not evil, right? It's something that just needs to be integrated and balanced, as opposed to maybe the philosophers of the Greek that, and I don't know enough about their axioms, but that see it as something that's completely should be removed or detached or should not be engaged with at all. So they say evil.
I don't think that's the case with the philosophers. I mean, if we go into like the spoilers, right, for where this chapter is going, then the Rambam does resolve this conflict, right, and basically he says that they are only disagreeing on the pshat, but if you dig deeper, they're actually in agreement, and the difference is the mitzvot ben adam lemakom versus ben adam lechavero.
Right, like right. We're going to the spoilers where you're correct that there's going to be a separation between chuyok shimi, like between chukim and mishpatim, right? Things that we can understand and things that we can't explain. We'll get there, but I do want to point out that already with Cain, receive atatim sholbo, right? It doesn't say and you will eradicate it, as an evil won't exist. Rather, you will conquer it, and by conquering it, that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It means like I could use it now for the good. And this goes all the way back to, let's say, Pirkei Avot and Rav Yaakov, right? When I'm walking down, I'm learning, and I see a tree, and I say it's a beautiful tree, and now Pirkei Avot says then you are, it's eligible for death, right? Because you severed your learning of Torah. And for let's say, I'm using that to say, like, if I'm the Hasid, it's not that he doesn't have any urges. Rather, I'm calling the Hasid here what Ramchal calls the Kadosh. The Hasid is someone that could come back in and fully be integrated, which is like, oh, I see that this woman is beautiful. It's fully integrated. So let's say the appreciation of her beauty is all lishma, right? It's all for heaven's sake. There's no element over there which is like, there is a natural desire, which what we're calling evil, if it's unoriented, right? Because then it's just like, she's gorgeous, the body. But if it's realizing and seeing the nature, the natural element of it, but fully within the context of lishma, of for heaven's sake, that's just very difficult to do. Now, I would say that Chazal is talking to practically how most humans interact with the world, right? Most people can't do that, Neo move, and I could see the matrix, so I could dodge the bullets, right? It's like they don't see, it's not harmonious for them to just hold a bullet and be like, oh wow, look, so interesting, a bullet, and drop it, and all the bullets suddenly fall. Does that mean now no bullet could hit Neo? No, it means that he is just aware of it now, so he could be fully integrated with it. That makes sense?
Kind of lost you on the Neo analogy, honestly.
The Neo example was the Hasid, like someone could look at the world and not be fully in. The Kovesh is looking at the world, and he doesn't necessarily see the code so clearly, right? There's things that seem like confusing to him, or like in this sense, this beautiful woman, right? There's a desire element of it. Now I'm going to control myself because I know that this sequence doesn't lead down a good path, right? And then, like, way to go, you managed to control yourself. Neo is looking at the woman and he sees the code. It's not, there isn't, as in he understands that she's actually beautiful. Like we're reading that the same, but the sequence is clear to me. So I'm not confused right now. It's like, oh, I'm going to be after this person. Rather, I could maneuver around that person without feeling that need while still appreciating her beauty. Go ahead. Any thoughts, comments, or hemshachnu? Hemshachnu. Okay. Okay. You're in the right place already, or no? Or you continue? Yeah. No.
Here we go.
ולפי המובן.
Yeah.
Yeah. ולפי המובן מפשוטי שני המאמרים בתחילת המחשבה, הם סותרים זה את זה, right? So like that's the tension. ואין העניין כן. אבל שניהם אמת ואין מחלוקת ביניהם. What a surprise. והוא שהרעות אשר הן אצל הפילוסופים רעות, אשר אמרו שמי שלא יתהווה עליהן יותר חשוב מן המתהווה עליהן, ויכבוש את יצרו מהן. הם עניינים המפורסמים אצל כל בני אדם שהם רעות, right? This is more universal. שפיכות דמים וגניבה וגזלה והונאה ולהזיק למי שלא הרע לו, ולגמול רע למיטיב לו, ולבזות אב ואם וכיוצא באלו. והן המצוות שאמרו אליהן החכמים, ז"ל, שאילו לא נכתבו, ראיות הן להיכתב. If they weren't written, they should have been written. ויקראו אותן קצת מחכמינו האחרונים, אשר חלו חולי המדברים. מצוות Okay, he's ripping into people, מצוות השכליות, ואין ספק שהנפש אשר תחשוף לדבר מהם ותשתוקק אליו, שהיא חסרה, ושהנפש החשובה לא תתהווה לאחד מאלו הרעות כלל, ולא תצטער בהימנעה מהם. אבל הדברים שאמרו עליהם החכמים, שהכובש את יצרו מהם הוא יותר חשוב, וגמולו יותר גדול, הם התורות השמיעיות, וזה אמת, שאלמלא התורה לא היו רעות כלל. ומפני זה אמרו שצריך האדם שיניח נפשו אוהבת אותן, ולא יהיה לו מנוע מהן רק התורה. ובחן חכמתם, במה שהם שילו, שהם לא אמרו, אל יאמר אדם, אי אפשר להרוג הנפש, אי אפשר לגנוב, אי אפשר לכזב, אלא אי אפשר מעשה אבי שבשמיים גזר עליי. אבל הביאו דברים שמיים כולם, בשר וחלב ולבישת שטנז ועריות, ואלו המצוות וכיוצא בהן. הן אשר קרא השם יתברך חוקות, ואמרו רבותינו ז"ל, חוקים שחוקקתי לך, אין לך רשות להרהר בהם. ועובדי כוכבים משיבים עליהן, והשטן מקטרג בהם, כגון פרה אדומה, ושעיר המשתלח, אשר קראו אותן האחרונים שכליות, יקראו מצוות כפי מה שברו החכמים. correct. מה שאומרים, הנה התבהר לך וכל מה שאמרנו, איזה מין עבירות יהיה מי שלא ישתוקק אליהן יותר חשוב מן המשתוקק אליהן, וכובש יצרו מהן, ואיזה מהן יהיה העניין בהפך. וזה חידוש נפלא, באמת שני המאמרים האלו, ולשונם מורה על אמיתות מה שביארנו, וכבר נשלמה כוונת זה הפרק. Wow. We got to the last, oh, it's not the last one, it's number 6. Okay. So, a lot of stuff going on over here. Okay. So, yes, please. Sorry for their English, as I'm thinking over here. English is always great because the English is already like half of the interpretation. So
yeah. At first blush, by a superficial comparison of the sayings of the philosophers and the rabbis, one might be inclined to say that they contradict one another. Such, however, is not the case. Both are correct and, moreover, are not in disagreement in the least. As the evils which the philosophers term such, and of which they say that he who has no longing for them is more to be praised than he who desires them, but conquers his passion, are things which all people commonly agree are evil, such as the shedding of blood, theft, robbery, fraud, injury to one who has done no harm, ingratitude, contempt for parents, and the like. The prescriptions against these are called commandments, about which the rabbis said if they had not already been written in the law, it would be proper to add them. Some of our later sages who were infected with the unsound principle of the Mutkaliman, the Medabrim, Islamic sect, right? Called these rational laws. There is no doubt that a soul which has the desire for and lusts after the above-mentioned misdeeds is imperfect, that a noble soul has absolutely no desire for any such crimes and experiences no struggle in refraining from them. When, however, the rabbis maintain that he who overcomes his desires has more merit and a greater reward than he who has no temptation, they say only in reference to laws that are ceremonial prohibitions. This is quite true, since, were it not for the law, they would not at all be considered transgressions. Therefore, the rabbis say that man should permit his soul to entertain the natural inclination for these things, but that the law alone should restrain him from them. Ponder over the wisdom of these men of blessed memory, manifest in the example they adduce. They do not declare, men should not say, I have no desire to kill, to steal, and to lie, but I have a desire for these things. Yet what can I do, since my Father in heaven forbids it? The instances they cite are all from the ceremonial law, such as partaking of meat and milk together, wearing clothes made of wool and linen, and entering into consanguineous marriages. These and similar enactments are what God called my statutes, chukutai, which, as the rabbis say, are statutes which I, God, have enacted for thee, which thou hast no right to subject to criticism, which the nations of the world attack, and which Satan denounces, as, for instance, the statutes concerning the red heifer, the scapegoat, and so
I would just say that leharher, right, is not le'arer. It's not really that they're criticizing. Like in Hebrew, it's not, you're not even allowed to like
ponder.
Yeah, correct. You can't even like really ponder their validity. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just if you said that, I just say like Leibovich, for instance, said that if Chazal said that he should recite, phone book, then that's what he would recite. Like in that sense, like you don't get to ponder that.
Okay, we can discuss that. Those transgressions, however, which the later sages called rational laws, are termed commandments, as the rabbis explain. It is now evident from all that we have said that what the transgressions are, for which, if a man has no desire at all, he is on a higher plan than he who has a longing, but controls his passion for them. And it is also evident what the transgressions are of which the opposite is true. It is an astonishing fact that these two classes of expressions should be shown to be compatible with one another, but their content points to the truth of our explanation. This ends the discussion of the subject matter of this chapter.
Ends the discussion. Mic drop. Right. So as he repeats again towards the end right now, though basically there's a difference with how we're looking at evil, right? So the philosophers are talking about these universal evils, right? Which are recognized by all as wrong, right? Like you're murdering, you're pillaging. And in such a case, we don't want someone succumbing to his desires, right? And that's not when our sages are saying that, like, one who's greater, his evil inclination is, they're not talking about this kind of, they're not referring to this kind of evil, right? With, like, I would say the opposite, right? A person that ideally, really shouldn't have these inclinations, right? So in this case, we're agreeing with the philosophers that this person should be the chassid when dealing with murder, when dealing with rape. These aren't things you should be like, I want to, but like, really, you should be able to wean yourself off of those things. Or not that it's not possible to be able to be those people that have the desire and conquer it. Rather, the ideal is to be able to completely detach from that.
Yeah.
The evil that Chazal, that the sages are talking about, is really these ones that are been prohibited by God, right? This is like a divine decree that God is telling us that, without the Torah's guidance, we wouldn't even know that they're wrong, right? So a classic example of this would be the kashrut, right? The dietary laws, right? So like I'm not eating certain animals or things like that. So like, or consuming blood, like why would this have this? This is not going to fall in the category of, This is not going to fall in the category of the philosopher's evil, right? Because like, go ahead and drink the blood, or go ahead and mix your meat and milk together. There could be a secondary reason that Chazal then gives that we could then connect back to like a moral law, but al panav, on face value, this doesn't make sense, right? So you could say that before the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai, right? So there's no reason why a person should feel like a repulsion towards these prohibitions. Like if up until Mount Sinai, this guy loves having milkshakes with steak, right? It's not like, how could he be doing this? Like it totally makes sense, right? So that's why it makes sense that there's a merit in restraint, right? When Chazal comes and says, now that God is telling you, don't eat this, or we'll use the example that Gilad gave, right? Like now you will recite phone books, right? And you'd be like, but it's boring. I don't want to be doing that. The point is, if you manage to control yourself and do that regardless, there's a very big merit over there.
Well,
right? Sorry, go ahead.
In regards to that, to reciting phone books, which is not something I started yet, but
you're way behind.
You're way behind time.
Some people say you also read the classifieds. It's not so easy.
Is that really so? But would that? But that, how is that? Can't be. I mean, it's an example, obviously, or it's an extreme example, but it's not really a chok. Neither is it connected to a chok. So even if the sages are not infallible in that sense, right? They're only there's infallibility, to something that is related to chok. But if that's my assumption here, but right, if it's something that was enacted by the sages, it could be, you can reason. I mean, you might still need to do it, but you can reason against it or think logically how it might not be, or that there are gaps in the thinking there, right? So it's not like we will do what the sages tell us to do without thinking about it, because they're not infallible, not like the chukima, unless reciting phone books is related to a chok. But if it's not related to a chok, then what's the?
We're talking about, like, I think the assumption is, right, when Leibovich was saying that,
In
right,
that example, reading
Yeah.
it as a hook.
yeah, that's
Right.
what he was saying. He isn't he didn't spend a time reading phone books, and Chazal never said that, right? Like, but generally, like when the halacha says, you can eat cheese before eating a steak, but you can't after, and you need 6 hours, and you need 2 separate sinks, right? How clearly is that related to a chok? Like, where is that interpretation? And I think, like, most of the time, the answer is, like, you're not supposed to sort of really get the mind, the sechel, it to the point of content, right? You could say sometimes, like, that there might be exceptions, but I think the Rambam is or like Leibovich was very, very Rambam-esque in that sense, saying, like, the point of this is that you, Ben, could sit and say, like, what is this? I don't, and you'd still do it.
Right. So, I mean,
there's like a secondary level to it, though, which is, you're correct, Ben, that once it gets to the level of, like, wait, is that considered shatnez, wool and linen together or not? That could be there could be a disagreement between rabbis of interpreting,
right,
and
6 hours or 3 hours.
and that could be challenged. But you can challenge. Maybe you don't even need to separate wool and linen.
Yeah.
You could even challenge, like, what those two terms mean. But at some point, there's something that you were, and now we could give different good, nice ideas what the meaning of that is. Why, like, you could look at a Zohar idea. One means chesed, one means this, putting it together. That's all nice. And maybe it's even true. The point is, at that time, they're saying we don't have, or we'll take a different example of the red heifer, right? We know King Solomon fully understood all the commandments aside for the red heifer, right? So the idea is that, like, there's some things that, like, are beyond our intellectual reach. And I would just argue that doesn't mean that an idea like a red heifer there isn't like a cultural appropriation happening from a surrounding culture. Nevertheless, it's then still integrated with, like, a chok idea. Like, you're going to do this because this makes sense for humans. So there's, like, a rational sense to it on a certain level, but then how God is specifying that remains to be sort of developed and seen as the generations go on. And we see this, there's chukim and mitzvot. In the Torah, you also see sometimes it's called Torah to Mishpatim, but usually there's chukim and mitzvot, right? We also speak about here in later on, right? We're going to see the distinction sort of echoes where she talks about mitzvot sichliot and mitzvot shemiyot, right? Sichliot are the ones that are aligning with sort of like the natural moral understanding, right? So they could be comprehended by humans, right? So there's sichliot, sechel, and shemiyot are things that we were told, right? They're like divine will. God is telling us to do this. So here we see again that you can see this. And when he talks about, he would be talking about Rav Sadia Gaon when he talks about the kalam, the people that are talking about these ideas, or Meksad Mechachamenu when he talks about Meksad Mechachamenu, he's probably talking about like Rav Sadia Gaon, and he really you could see over here that he's very critical of the conclusions of that the kalams were getting to. Right. And he really preferred a much more, which we see over here, a much more nuanced approach, which is trying to split between two of these things, right? Which ultimately like a balance between both of them. And we should strive to understand the reason behind all these stuff, right? Maimonides famously wrote, we spoke about this with Kalanimus last week or 2 weeks ago. He wrote Tamei mitzvot, right? Like I'm saying, he got into a whole book about like the reasons behind it, right? So he could talk about why we don't need to understand it, but this is something that we should, of course, try to understand. And even if it's not immediately apparent, as I'm saying, like we find this on as the generation goes on, right? There could be a deeper meaning that over time we understand. And he in the More, in the Guide to the Perplexed, in the More Nevuchim, he does explain that these are not like empty rituals, but they do serve to benefit us, right? So even a concept like which he's famous for, like the sacrifices, which he says they won't be necessary in the future, and we did it because of like the cultural reasons. Nevertheless, he's saying it's not like an empty ritual, though. There's something behind it that we do need to understand. And like I said, he also mentions over here, he mentions Shlomo HaMelech and the red heifer, like we mentioned last week as well. And he is suggesting that maybe as we grow in understanding, you could see that something that's shim'i, right? Something that is more understood through divine will, right? Like this is what God wanted and we're doing it, over time could become something more rational, right? So let's think of an example. Washing one's hands, okay? So washing one's hands was once just purely like a matter of faith. This is why you're doing it. There wasn't an understanding of hygiene. We didn't know that like these little bacteria are flying around. Now you could look at it and understand there's also like a rational basis to it. That's not the reason why you're doing it, but now I could layer on top of it another sichli level to it. And that potentially you could ask, can I use that then to change the halacha? That's a more complicated question, but definitely as far as interacting with it, you, Ben, could tell your son, why do you wash your hands? Because daddy said so, right? And you can see how well they'll take you, right? Until like he's 13. Or as he's doing it, you could also explain, aside from being holy, X, Y, Z, there's also cleaning yourself. And this, of course, makes sense. Now, you could also say that like there are the specific details of washing the hands, right? Then you could start playing around with those ideas. But then there's the concept of self of washing the hands. I'm trying to think of an example where it could go the other way around, right? Where something that's more rational after some time could seem less clear, right? So no one should get offended. Same-sex marriage, right? You could say back in the day, why are we even having this discussion? Now you could be like, 1 second, like, is it an issue? Like, it's hard for us now I wouldn't necessarily say us, but you can see the world would have a harder time understanding something like this now, even though in the past, this was much easier to understand, right? So it's our job to really explore these things and try to understand these things. That's why when the idea of Lola hair, I disagree with that. I disagree with that idea. Now,
I just want to push back on that, which maybe is not what you would expect from the secular person in the chat, but I think the concept of Lola al Hil is generally, well, you could look at it in two ways, right? One way is to say some things, like because literally God said so, you don't get to make questions. This is like just because he said so.
But like, for 1 second, when you say that, not ask questions, my issue was, I'm not even saying I could ask questions to deny. Can I not explore what's happening there?
Okay, so I'm saying that's one interpretation, which I think is
the Rambam.
Let's say less useful, at least for me reading into it, and I feel like that's, let's say, not the angle, and I don't think it really corresponds with the Rambam's thinking in general, because he's very cerebral and he wants to think of things. But what I think it does refer to is that this is offense to the sechel, to the mind, right? Like the concept is that even I discussed this once in connection with the concept of freedom. Like you say freedom, but you don't, like when you get to it, it can mean a lot of different things. And one of the concepts, like the basic concept is like you're not chained. Like you can go outside. You're free. You're not limited. But like that's freedom from. And there's a question of what's freedom to do things. Like, and that's more like what positive freedom is not simple. And one of the concepts is, I don't remember the exact name, but it's kind of a hetero freedom. Like you are free by binding yourself to this set of laws. Like and
taking on more responsibility actually gives me more freedom.
Something like that. And I think it's because, like, it's not just more responsibility. You are binding yourself to something, because when you are detached from everything,
you're floating.
Then you're floating, and that's a very empty kind of freedom. You only get freedom from, but not freedom to. And this right. Binding allows you to sort of act within a conscience. It's kind of like, by analogy, it's like we feel that gravity is really oppressive, right? Like we can't fly, but without gravity, we are, you put people in a space station, it's not so easy to live there, right? Like you don't, it might be cool to float around for a bit.
Apparently they can't have sex. That's what they say.
But how is this related to chukim?
I think that they are like gravity for the Rambam. Like they are the enabling constraints in Vervakian language. Like these are the things that are constrained upon you, that no matter how much your sechel tries to break free from them, you're not supposed to, that they are like the fixed points that you can't break from using your sechel.
Right. I mean,
sorry, go ahead.
I mean, I don't know if I have too much to say, but it seems right to me of like my understanding of this, because at some point there is revelation, right? There is a sense of, there is a grounding to where.
This is great. This is good.
There's a grounding to where, okay, we take on this and we use our intellect to build upon it, but there is a ground below it. Like we don't start from zero. So yeah, in a sense, it's there is, and that's where the faith discussion also happens. But yeah.
So I think you were alluding to a good point, which we'll get to. I see Ups asked over here, I'd love to understand chok better. So again, just to explain, a chok is they're commandments, right? That without divine revelation, right, we would not be able to perceive them as inherently moral or immoral, right? They're followed because of the divine decree. Again, we spoke about there are then details of how this divine decree practically manifests in the world, where there could be some wiggle room in interpretation, but the idea of the decree itself is what Gilad is talking about over here, is a sign that you're commanded to do. You couldn't have known earlier, and it's sort of it's foundational, right? It's there. Mitzvot, right, which are like the general commandments, they are typically aligning with, like we said, what is natural, our sense of morality, right? It makes sense and it's really accepted by human reason. Now, Ben, to your point with regards to, you use the word revelation, which is what triggered my response, which is one second, one more thing over here. I see Jacob is writing over here, Charuta leluchot. I believe, because he's saying over here, Chezi, you know what I'm talking about, and he's obviously welcome to join us. I believe he's referencing the idea, right, that these lofty ideas ultimately have to be, grounded, right? They have to be, they're written into the luchot, because it's Etzba Elohim, it's the hand of God, and it's I don't want to say it's lo b'shamayim, but at some point you have to be able to manifest with these ideas. And if they're tethered to like the complete freedom, sort of, I can't move with that, right? I'm only going to have fun with bumper cars when it's locked in a certain area where I know I can play these bumper car games. So there's a sense that once it's charut al luchot, these are things that are already built into the system, and we're taking those luchot with us. There's he's talking about something else. Inscribed charut al luchot. He's talking about charut. He was referencing the freedom thing that I believe Gilad was talking to, that the word inscribed or etched into in Hebrew also means freedom. So the fact that it's written inside, which you think this actually means that, you can't escape it, like it can't be changed. Rather, the fact that it's carved inside actually allows for more freedom. So Jacob,
the rabbinic tradition of lo tikre this, tikre this.
Exactly. Exactly. So we learned. But back to what Ben was saying about the revelation, that's why it's important that we need to realize the difference between how the prophets, right, which are much closer to revelation or are connected, obviously, that they're revealing these stuff, how they're approaching their moral guidance, and how Chazal is doing it, right? So,
right.
Sorry, go ahead.
But that's what I said. Like, there's no more chukim, right? I mean, nobody's gonna come up with a new chuk. Everything from now on is rational. Even beyond Moshe, is there was no revelation when it comes to halacha, right? It was
there's hora'at sha'ah, right? So the prophets have some wiggle room,
right.
But before we go on, let's just give our gracious and lovely host say hello. Let's see, he's doing okay.
Hello. I actually have to leave, but this is one of my favorite talks of the Rebbe, which he explains, right? So the whole thing by Passover, which is coming up, is God takes us out of the house of slavery, right? And he says to Pharaoh, right? I am taking them out of Beit Avadim, right? So that they will serve me, Yavduni, right? So what does it mean for us to come out of the house of slavery, right? And Jordan Peterson talks about this a lot regarding the Exodus seminar, right? The actual freedom, right, is to be in your correct place, to do that which is correct, right? And that's why the 10 Commandments, right, they start with, I am the Lord your God who took you out of the Egypt, the house of slavery, right? And then it gives you a bunch of commandments, right? And the word cherut al haluchot, right? This is Exodus 32:16. Yeah, it's a cute word play, but we don't believe it's just a cute word play. It's in the Torah itself. Cherut al haluchot. That freedom comes from the 10 Commandments, comes from the luchot, comes from doing that which God tells us to do. I just thought that was really important. So have fun.
No, don't leave, Uncle Beam. You don't have to go. Don't pretend like there's work.
I have to in 15 minutes. I definitely have to go. But okay, yeah.
We're almost done. You want to be here to finish the 6th parak?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so like we're.
I just want to add one thing about
Please.
Ben's your point about revelation. I think like I want to add to that like the Buddhist phrase, which is before enlightenment, carry water, chop wood. After enlightenment, carry water, chop wood. Right? Like there's a sense I think that like revelation is supposed to be like a drastic change of what you do, but I don't think like with respect to these commandments that are shimiyot, I don't think revelation is supposed to give you that. Like you should, like still that should be a part of carry
Right,
water
right.
jug with.
Well, I don't know if this relates to what you just said, but in a sense, when I have discussions with friends that are more secular, and I tried to explain about why I in a sense changed my perspective in life a little bit, in a sense where I, let's say, adhere to revelation to a sense, is part of it is really about what the sages did with it. So the fact that I believe it is true, or I act as if it's true, is probably because I was born Jewish, so that's the closest thing that I have. But B is because that I saw what the sages did with that, and it seems good, So I don't know if it seems to be related to what you're saying in a sense, because it's not like it's not like I say, it's not like, okay, it's revelation, and then it's like there's no. It's hard for me to argue for why I would believe in the Kuzari sense of like the revelation happened. It's more really about the sense of like, this is what happened after it. And so this seems, and this is why I'm attracted to it.
Well, so let's get into that a little. So, the prophets are really, they're focusing on sort of like the philosophers, right? They are emphasizing that there's universal evils that, right, we could all recognize, and we said that we could understand them using our reason. And the sages are more focusing on the divine decrees. Now, in theory, we could say this is like a dual approach, right? I'm doing both of them. I have all my exits covered, right? Both from like my rational understanding and my faith-based understanding. I'm covering all my levels of observance. However, again, you have to realize that, and they failed ultimately, or in a certain sense, the prophets really were assuming that they're addressing this ideal man, and they were expecting people to sort of change their ways, right? The prophet keeps on just hammering back and keeps on hammering them about doing the right thing. And we see that even though they had great personalities, right? They really struggled. They couldn't transform the generation. I was talking earlier to Andrew about Enoch getting taken away, where he didn't manage to change or educate the people ultimately. And in the end, they do engage in evils, and they do murder, and they do idol worship. So I believe that Chazal realized that that's very nice and good, but we need to make a system that's really going to focus on uprooting the evil through a practical laws and guidance that really are emphasizing the importance, right, of these divine decrees, of the mitzvot shemiyot. And you could say that this is really addressed seeing people where they're at, right? Most people have in the beginning, at least, of their moral journey, right? They're having a hard time with these divine decrees, right? And it's harder than rational commandments, but it is they're really hoping that you eventually could, by addressing these issues, it will eventually allow you to address deeper issues as well, right? And this is why there's that idea of chacham adif min avi, right? The sage is preferable over the prophet. And Rabbi Cook has this explanation, and we like to bring Rabbi Cook all the time, that the prophets at the time, right, the surrounding spiritual forces when they were alive were much greater, right? This is why they were really dealing with ideals, because they were fighting evil with powerful words ultimately. But the sages were focusing on rectifying the private matters, for the individual. And ultimately this ended up being more sustainable, because this is what we see on the ground. And I think this is connecting to what you were saying, Ben, about, I don't know what happened with the revelation, but I know later on the system they built also really made sense, right? And you keep people away from doing significant sins, and you're doing that by focusing really on practical aspects of their daily life. And that is really the focus that Chazal, their sages, ended up taking on. And you could
Just to
Right,
understand what you're saying, because I want to be sure I got you right. You're saying like what the mitzvot shemiyot are like muscle memory training, like you do things that
That's so good. Yes.
that you sort of told you should do, so that like the mitzvot sichliot would follow.
Yeah. Correct. And you'll get into that rhythm, and then it will also be like less difficult for you to do this. Now,
Because I think like the Rambam is saying something a bit different, which correlates with things he's saying elsewhere. Like he says that if you're doing Torah and mitzvot for reward in the world to come, then that's a lower spiritual level. You're like a child who gets candy for studying Torah.
mhm.
And I think what he's saying here in this passage, where the more struggle, the more the reward. He's saying like the higher spiritual level is to resist the mitzvot shemiyot. If this is easy for you, if you're not like struggling with things that make no sense, it might be because you're sort of with an obedient, conformist, maybe even like slave-like mentality, right? That's not a high spiritual level, according to the Rambam. That's how I read it.
I see it in the way I also understand the Rambam is that, you're looking at, these are like, meta historical events, shifts between the prophets and the sages. And you could say that Moses is the example of wisdom and revelation combined, right? It's someone that did that. And Jacob won't like this, so I'm sorry. But I've said this often, so he knows, he's bored by this already. But but returning to the land, right? There is seemingly a demand for higher ideals, right? Like we want to return in a certain sense. Talk to me about like the global warming. Talk to me about the prophet conversation. And it seems like that would be like, don't talk to me about like the 6 hours, the 3 minutes, the 4 things. Like how are those things are connected? Now I think while we do need to return to, let's say, those grander ideas, the sages were right and in instilling that memory muscle. It doesn't end there though, because once you get to a population that hopefully, seemingly, could raise to the challenge and have the conversation with the prophets, so to speak, we need to now reveal why the 6 hours and the washing of the hands, why these things matter. So we can't, like we were saying earlier, we can't keep these things just in the level of the shemiyot. As time goes by,
just because this is always a confusion, are you talking like the days of Mashiach, or are you talking right now, or are those
I'm talking
the same?
right now? I'm talking right now. If I want to engage, for example, we'll be very blunt.
I have to go, but please continue. Thank you,
Ben, thank you so much. We finished Perek 6. We're continuing next week with the 7th chapter. Gilad, what I would say is that I'm talking about these days, and I would say that for a mind like yours, right? And we're not like, I'm not trying to sell you on something, but assuming I believe in the path I'm on and the truth of the Torah, I believe that.
What was the first? I couldn't hear you. The what?
The truth, the truth of my path.
Of
my path. My dad.
Okay, yeah. The path I'm on. Okay, just
the path I'm on.
Yeah.
I understand how someone like you, which I would say the philosopher, right, who's coming in and having conversations about, reach me, Chezi. I'm not saying that you're saying that, but I'm saying if I'm talking to someone secular, who's someone that's talking about grand ideas, I'm not going to have a conversation with you where I start explaining to you about phylacteries, right, tefillin, and I said, could we do it? Because we do it. And that's how we do it. That's not going to satisfy you. That might have satisfied most Jews for most of history.
I don't think you're right, but okay, let's go.
Okay. I would say that now our job is and Rabbi's job is, and I feel that's part of the tension, if you're going to tell someone or you're going to have an issue about like, why is there a tefillin stand next to a school? Our job is at the very least to explain the deep meaning of the tefillin and how it's connected to the prophet ideals and how it's connected to global warming and evil in the world, and all of it's connected. But if I just leave it at the level of Shim'i, I believe that at some point that becomes more complicated. But you're obviously
as usual, Chezi is absolutely right. I don't agree with him at all.
Okay.
And hopefully Gilad will agree with me that you have things absolutely backwards.
Oh.
It is particularly like Philo of Alexandria sat 2,000 years ago and was trying to explain all the reasons and the spirit behind and and people have Tamei HaMitzvot for a very long time, because look, we need that sort of inspiration, because we don't have Kibul Ol, we don't have the actual acceptance of God's kingdom and God's rule to simply accept things as, okay, I should wake up every morning and pray as I should, right?
No, but why should you?
Can I just give one example, because you remind me something of that's a really nice anecdote. So in the army, I was teaching programming, and one of the courses was for Haredi people, and it was like a class of people between no knowledge of math and like literally doctorates. So it was very mixed, and you started to just like set up so like the order of math operations, and you tell them like, okay, so the parentheses come first. Why? That's what they'd ask you. It's like, why do because that's what I'm teaching you. Like, this is the convention, and they have a very hard time with accepting that there's a convention in math, and sometimes like going back to the history of why you do the parentheses first doesn't help anyone do math, right? Like that's like the sort of tension that I'm feeling here, in a sense that like there are some things that you have to, if you're a mathematician and you're going to go into the depth of math and you're going to study that history, like, yeah, sure, like find out why it took so long to invent the number 0, right? But if you're studying the basics of maths, that's not where you start. You don't start by asking what historically made people write math this way.
But I'm not looking for the historical reason right now. I'm saying, and like I was giving,
or even the inspiration. Like I don't think I could give them I don't think that giving them inspiration or beauty, maybe it would help. But I don't think that.
I mean, that's the question. And by the way, there's obviously a difference. But using your analogy, the question is, if we see, right, there's a hunger to learn math, right? But people are saying like, but before I can learn the math, like, or I want to talk to me about quantum physics. You're like, okay, no problem. But like, first we got to do like rudimentary math. It's just like annoying.
Okay, so let me just make it specific. So I think from like the people I know and the general mindset, my intuition is that there is a type of people who like to go to these mostly popular Kabbalah things, and you know they give them some word plays and anecdotes, and they'd go like, this is really nice. But for a lot of people in my areas, right, I think I would be a lot more receptive to people just saying like, this is just my custom. It's a thing I do. Why do you do it? It's just a thing I do.
That's fine if you're respecting that. My point is, now I'm having a conversation with, let's say, someone that is interested and wanting to do more. Okay. Of course, there's the umbrella of like, I do it because I was commanded by God, right? And you'd be like, who said so? Does God exist? That's a separate conversation. I'm saying if I'm trying to engage speaking Torah to people, right? Not me, the Jews of the world, the rabbis of the world. I think that if you want to, again, and this, if someone's interested in the answer of we do it because we do it, I don't think is sufficient in today's world.
I'll be maybe more specific, right? I think it would be a lot more impactful, right? If if there's something around me that's someone who is an exemplar, and I'm around them, and they do this frequently when I'm around them, and I see them doing it, that is the most likely chance for me to get something out of it. Whereas when someone is trying to convey like the depth and the notions, I don't think that has the same impact. And I think like if you look at the trends in the spiritual journeys of people in Israel specifically, right? They almost all have that element in their story, right? They came across, maybe in the army, that's the most common thing, someone who they found inspiring. That person had that those traditions and that spiritual connection. You know, maybe it's one flavor of Tzionut Datit, maybe it's another, but that is usually how these stories go. And the stories that go the opposite way, and like it's not a subject I really want to open right now because it's long, but they usually are not stories that I would consider good stories. Like the people who are really at a crisis point in their lives, and that's when they are sort of picked up by the proselytizers. A lot of the times, you know, they detach from their families, they burn bridges, like it's
right. All those things are bad.
No. But just talking about in a sense of Verveki, right? So there's the propositional, perspectival, procedural, and participatory, right? There is a procedural aspect in which, propositional aspect in which we can say, look, washing your hands before you eat, that's for cleanliness, it's for hygiene, it's for, you know, you won't have microbes, etc., 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 right? And it's nice that we can now see, right? But until 200 years ago, the Jews were just the fastidious people who were constantly washing their hands for no good reason, right? And having that propositional aspect to it is very nice and good.
Why is it nice and good?
Because it's one aspect of knowing. It's one aspect of knowing. It's not the only aspect of
Correct.
knowing.
It's not. I just think it allows more people to engage with it.
I don't know that it actually allows, especially today in our society where we are so propositional. It is actually what religion tends to give people is the participatory, perspectival, and procedural, right? And that's what, more than anything, today is moving us away from what you are saying.
Let me just try to bridge between what you're saying. I think like Chezi definitely would agree that all of these aspects are important in religion. I think the point maybe that I agree with Jacob and is like which one is the access point? Which one gets you into it? And I think the propositional is not the one that's going to get most people into it. You could, it's not like it has no purpose or meaning, but like there's propositional everywhere in everyththing.
Like the rabbis say, Ein hadibur ela hamasa ikar.
Everything you're saying is correct, and naaseh v'nishma, right? So I'm saying
Naaseh v'nishma.
Great. I'm saying that the naaseh v'nishma, you're obviously disagreeing. We'll do, and then we'll listen, right? There's first a participatory. I think that was easier to do in the past, and I think today, it's not. You could have people again speaking within a religious context, right? Like if I'm interested for people to participate like me, right? Assuming I believe that I'm participating in the right way, right? We could open that up as a side discussion. How like someone could come and say like, Chezi, the way you were praying really inspired me. I want to be doing this more. As far as like waiting 6 hours or doing this, that's like I'm not interested in. Like that's just like what the rabbi spoke about. I'm saying there is where we need to give an explanation, which is more than just we do it because we do it. I think because I don't know if I can inspire someone by waiting 6 hours. or inspired.
But I think you can. Like honestly, like I don't think that. I think in general, you're trying to rush things that can't be rushed, right? Like if your way of being is one that is inspiring, then people will be inspired. And I don't see the, like, I don't think it really matters what it is, like whether it's the religious practices that you're talking about or something else. I'll give you an example, like from physics, right? Like you can't teach physics even propositionally. That's not what you do in a physics degree. You teach it procedurally. You solve things, right? Like there are very little propositions in physics. I can like go over them in probably, I don't know, 10 minutes. All of the propositions I learned.
But they prove themselves, right? Like here I'm taking, unlike physics.
Proves what?
Okay, I really do have to go right now. I just want to say, I love you, Chezi, but a lot of the things you say are just ahistorical and not empirically true. The fact is,
one second, stop. Even the statement you said right now, the second you might be wrong, might not be true, right? So like that statement itself is problematic.
What do you mean?
You're going to say what I'm saying right now is not empirically true, right? All the things I've said, the things I said right now, most of the things I said.
You have this idea that for thousands of years, nobody's tried to explain things to people. That suddenly we're at an access point where things have changed. And I'm sorry, I don't think this is a historically accurate.
Let me just go heat my water. Let me go heat my water with fire.
What?
Oh wait, there's electricity. 1 second. It's fine. I'll talk about it with my friends in Babylon. 1 second. I'm in the land of Israel.
Chezi,
I know you, Jacob. You're late to the party. I'm waiting for the date. You're shirt to wear.
Very funny, but I just posted on X. Od lo avda tikvatenu, tikva shenot alpayim. Right?
That's it. See, Gilad?
Yeah.
The only way we're going to get him Zionistic is if we explain why.
But od lo avda tikvatenu. Tikva. You should have some tikva.
Yeah, I mean, 2,000 years, that's right around the corner, right?
I mean, if you're looking from like a historical perspective of since the beginning of the world, that's a little dot. It's nothing.
I'm just saying, like, it's not the phrase "Atikva bat shnot alpayim" is kind of funny because like the expiration date is really really close. Like that's not a long time for hope, considering like when it was written, I guess it was like.
I know Jacob disagrees. I think it's more when you give the analogy about physics, I just think like if you are to convince someone, right, that putting on phylacteries, I would say there's only, even if the person gets inspired by me putting on the phylacteries, right, now you would agree that like ultra-Orthodox guy or Chezi putting on the phylacteries, they both look the same and they're both shuckling the same direction, right? What's inspiring you is, let's say, I guess, knowing who I am and being like I'm saying there's something like the act itself of putting it on my head. I don't know if that's inspiring, right? And and it might be, right? And I would say that, and we see this in the country. I could go around and talk about and this has practical implications when we talk about ideas of, let's say, a theocracy or like a medinat halacha, which is if you perceive it in a backwards way, then there's going to be a lot of resistance to that if it's explained differently. And that doesn't mean like now everyone needs to accept it. I'm just saying if you want to even have the conversation, it's and this is you and I discuss all the time. Jewish and democratic, it's only fair to have that conversation when I'm discussing Judaism, that's not seen as who in Israel has political power and has the claim on how Judaism is experienced in Israel. I understand that that's practically the argument, but that's not the philosophical argument because it's a straw man, right? So if I'm trying to inspire people with regards to commandments,
I'm just saying, like, is it a straw man? Like, it's a straw man if you present it that way, but to say, like, that there's a fundamental clash that comes about when you involve religion and politics in the way that they are already in Israel.
agreed. You're right.
And, like, so that's, I'm just saying, like, to say that it's just like the wrong way, but let's do it again and this time it'll be better. I'm just saying, like, that's not so much of a straw man, like, to deal with. Like, saying somehow this will be better without really laying out mechanistically what went wrong. It's kind of like saying, let's try
But I
Soviet
am laying out
communism again.
what went wrong. I think you have people could debate when this happens, but this phenomenon of, like, the Israeli Haredi, right, which some people say, like, originates like in the 60s basically, or in the 70s, and up until then, like, they're participating in doing this, now gained a tremendous amount of political power and affects the government, world Jewry, how world Jewry looks at Israel, and vice versa. So you have this whole discussion based on someone that's saying, like, oh, this is what Judaism means. So how can that be inspiring? And, like, I even if what Jacob is saying is, like, he's not seeing the world the way I'm seeing it, which is totally fine. But if I'm looking at Israel and the state of Israel as something that is part of a process of, like, a divine process, then, like, it's easy for Jacob to be like, no, it's been working fine now and it'll be all fine. I'm saying, like, I feel like we're in the thicket. And if I want to be able to manifest what I think we're supposed to be doing, the way I see it being is you have right now a people, and this is true about the population. If people are studying physics and learning science, and we have AI, there are grand ideas out there. And that's why I'm going back to, like, the prophets. Like, we're in the time where, like, there's big personalities, there's big ideas out there. And then you have Chazal, or you have a 2,000 year of, like, little minutia things, right? 613, and not on a Sunday, not on a Monday. And if it's your cousin, you can, and that's all beautiful. Just to be able to keep that, I think it's more than just like, oh, that rabbi does it and I'm inspired by him. I think the mind of the physicist might be inspired by an individual, but I think if you want me now to go into a ritual bath, I want more than just, like, you do it because you do it. And it's because it's not only going to be that. Imagine, like, your math, your class with these soldiers. Why, like, I can't answer you guys now why there's parentheses and why the number one looks like this and why pi looks like this. Like, because you're going to get asked questions all the time because there's a lot of little details in Judaism and why I'm doing it. Like, I can't date him. I could date him. Math is cleaner over there. If I put these equations together, I'll get nothing. You don't have, if you put these equations together on a Monday, but if it's a full moon, but if it's a leap year, really the opposite can happen. So I think if there's people that are asking questions and I give them an answer from 3,000 years, from 200 years ago, and as I was saying, the context Jacob is talking about, most people not knowing how to read, not knowing how to write, having to work because their kid just died. How can you say that experience of religiosity is the same that we have today? It's just not. We're living in a different world. And one more thing I would just say, that, like, there's a concept called in Israel called Tanakh Begova Ha'einayim. I'm sure you know this idea, which is studying Bible, not at face value, but let's say, how would you translate that? Begova Ha'einayim.
Yeah. It's hard. I don't have a good one.
I guess, like, real talk, right? Like, we're going to Bible, like, real talk Bible.
Yeah.
Okay, so now there was resistance in the Orthodox communities, which is like, when you're not going to learn it through the prism of our sages. Like, they've already, like, they've safeguarded us. So, like, you're just going to learn it like you're reading something on the level, I guess, on the level. So I would say that, of course, you have to be aware of the context, but even the Talmud is a well, how do you say parshanut yotzeret? It's a creative
Interpretation.
interpretation. Clearly, they are not interpreting through the prism of whoever wrote the Mishnah. They're taking a license, and that's part of the living Torah. Now, that has been ossified for many years. But when I'm learning something, I am aware of what my sages have said. But if I only learn how the sages are doing it, I'm not learning Torah. I'm just learning something someone said. If I want to participate in Torah, I need to learn it with a creative endeavor as well. That doesn't mean I could do whatever I want. It just means if I want to make it my own, if I want to participate in it, as we said, the Jews of Mordechai and Esther, when they fought Xerxes, we say that they re-accepted the Torah during that period. And because up until that point, they were doing it because they were told to do it. And after the miracle of Purim, they're like, you know what? This seems like there's more than's going on. And I'm going to take this on for real this time. So I'm trying to suggest to Jacob also that like now you have people that want the real. But if you were teaching it up to a certain point and like, I'm going to do a practical presentation for this because I need to make sure that these 4 people are not touching that woman. So I'm going to say, don't go into that room and don't go into this place. And you can't talk with a woman a lot. So I'm going to do all these safeguards and just do it because I told you to do so. Today, with the world of
I think
Me Too, it's much easier for me to explain that.
I just think like you're misunderstanding what I'm saying.
Maybe
I'm definitely not saying like that you should tell people, hey, here are the things you should do, here's how you do it. But rather, I think that
But you know that is Judaism, right?
that what is Judaism?
Do these things. Like do these things and do those things and why and like for years, why do we do this? Because God commanded you to do so. I don't know why am I we just said why are you even giving you an answer? Why you marry hair? Why you like what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Do them.
I know. Like we talked about it just now.
Right. So,
of course I know.
so what would be the resistance? I mean, it's not resistance, I guess. Like you feel like
no, that's what I'm saying. I don't think you understand what I'm saying. I'm not telling you the way you're going to get people, to a better place. Regardless, right now, if we would agree, but I think like we can both agree that there are people for whom religion has been a positive thing in their lives and has allowed them to lead more meaningful and fuller lives. So whenever that happens, I'm happy. I don't have any objection like they all should be seculars or whatever. Like that's not how I see the world. So like for me, if I'm saying like if I see Chezi, is bringing someone into the fold, into their community, and that person is better for it, great. I speak to 2 of my friends who were younger, like during army service, both women, and they're both doing nativ. And they met they were matched with families that they connected with, and they found some meaning in that. Great. I have no objection to those things. I do have objections to a lot of stories where I heard where people were brought into religion from a position of crisis in their own lives, and that went very badly, and they ended up in, let's say, the more proselytizing and more cult-like sectors of religion, and those are places that frighten me. And like when I see someone mitkarev, right, I'm suspicious. I'm not saying it's necessarily bad, but I've seen enough of those things to be suspicious.
I mean, I've argued spoke about like the 3 levels of Chazara b'tshuva, of not repentance, but of coming closer to God, so to speak. Maybe that's like, I mean, or taking on, or becoming more observant. Okay, I would say there's the models that we spoke about this in the past, but there's the model that decides to leave everything behind, right? Cut the ties, everything on the old. I'm this brand new person, right? Which I don't think is healthy. There's the one that tries to balance some sort of 2-world situation, which is a little better. And there's those which is more controversial, which is, I don't need you to come and look like me, right? You could pave your own path. And more than that, with your insight from the outside, I too can learn, right? It could be, and I too could potentially even, the more you come in and show that your way is doable, perhaps they'll create a larger change within inside. Right now, it requires a lot to be able to imagine what something like that looks like, right? What is the
So let me give you an example of how I've experienced people who have very little knowledge of Judaism and coming closer to it, I would say, at least from my view. And I have no urge to proselytize anyone.
Right.
Right. But when I speak to my friend from physics, and I read with him the story of Rav Elazar and Va'isha Mechoar, like the rabbi and the ugly person, and like this rabbi is studying in his tower, and in the Gemara says, and because he was studying Torah a lot, his mind was crude, right? Like dato hayta gasa alav. And
right,
like
he's on the way to the town, and he says, if everyone's ugly like you in this town,
he meets this person, and he just looks at him and he's like, is everyone in your town as ugly as you? And the person goes like, you should ask the creator that made me. I'm just a vessel. And then he realizes he's so ashamed of himself, and he begs for forgiveness, and the person doesn't. But like, even just at the first point, right, when I read like this man was studying Torah and dato hayta gasa alav, my friend is going like, I get that. Like, I know what it's like when I can, spend days on days studying physics and da'ati gasa alai, and I'm going around with this aura, right? Like, now this to me is how, like, it's not about like propositional, it's about like where does this actually meet with you? And the practical is, these are, for me, like, these are treasure troves of insight, of relevance to my life, right? Like, I think about this story a lot. It resonates with things that happen in my life. So my experience is that this is how, like, healthfully people can come into it. And it's not because I put a lesson, specifically saying, I have this goal in mind. But this is me sharing something from how I deal with the world. This is something in my life that is relevant right now, and I'm sharing with this person. And I think it could be, I'm very connected to Talmud stories. But if it's phylacteries, then you tell a person, this is, I see where you are, and this is something I do, and it helps me in these situations, right? I put on the phylacteries, and the sort of connection that it puts me in, the sort of mindset that it allows me to be to deal with this situation differently, to connect with something that I feel is important. And I think that's like when you have that contact, and a person can see how this central thing in your life could be relevant to their lives. That is, I don't know any other way that I've seen like so prevalent in the stories of people sort of enculturating into.
But wouldn't that be also then, like, if I better explained why we do phylacteries, that could be, you could also find an insight there to be like, I never thought about it that way.
Maybe, but I think like, but I think
that's why I only asked.
But if that's where it meets you, right, and also you recognize in the person that you think that's where it would meet them, sure, as like a blanket thing, like as the path that you would say would be most likely for like a broader scope thing. First of all, I'm pretty bad at broad scope things, so I don't know. Like, everything I'm saying, I'm trying to sort of narrow down to the world of where I can like actually act on it and see what works. But like the notion itself in the broad strokes, like I've never found that useful. And it's similar, for instance, with Vervaeke's stuff. Like I found them very inspiring for me. But if I talk to people about them, I would almost never use any jargon. Like the term relevance realization is useless. As far as I've never used it in any conversation with anyone who's not in the Vervaeke sphere already. And like it's very deep into his philosophy, but that's exactly why like it's not communicable. And when you see people in his server, or at least in the past, when we're active, it's like they start saying like, "Oh, my relevance realization," and then your relevance realization, and like it becomes a word salad that has very little connection to the like technical term. Whatever.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
But so I would say that the technical word salad, right, that turned into, I mean, that is what the Baal Shem Tov did in a certain sense, right? The movement of Chassidut was saying like, whoa, like we got to figure out like these ideas either are hidden inside or are too lofty for, let's say, the people to connect to. So we're going to use different ideas, and we're going to and I mean, Rav Nachman, right? Like Kutem Aran, it's just like, first of all, as far as like creative license, the guy is all over the place, right? He's just like, making, connecting, putting dots, and then giving all these examples and stories upon stories upon stories, because that's where I'm going to meet someone, right? I'm not going to be able to connect him with necessarily like on this verse. Rather, I'm going to show him how this verse relates to many different things. So this goes back to, again, what I'm saying from when I say when you're saying as long as it meets me where I'm at and it's not a blanket statement, I would argue that there are truths in Chazal interpretations for a lot of these concepts that I think are much more appealing on a larger scale. So there's just like, people like the idea of freedom, for example. The Torah has other good ideas that they just need to package differently and talk about differently, which I believe will gain more favor just because people anyways connect to those ideas. Then there's Chanoch et hanar lefi darko. I think a rabbi in a community in X shouldn't be the same, teaching the same thing in the community of Y, because they need to be hearing it in this way and they need to be hearing it that way. Very important. All I'm saying is that rabbis today should arm themselves with Torah that is there with like exactly that example that you're saying, which is I could be a rabbi knows that, okay, the reason for phylacteries, there's the 4 classic answers we give. I'm saying, right, but guess what? There's another 17 answers. And those 17 other answers might actually allow you to connect to way more people, because the 4 answers that we've been using all the time, those, because of the inertia of tradition, that was great. But there were other options that we didn't touch on. That's the idea.
Sure. Yeah, I don't know if we're agreeing or not at this point, because I'm not sure if I understand what you're saying.
I appreciate the dialogue nonetheless.
All right.
But we should also, again, I'm waiting for more dust to settle, but we still have to have another political conversation.
I don't think the dust ever settles. But, I won't push you too much.
No, but like you would agree, for example, that let's say if we have elections in a month, right? That would be like, which we're not going to have, but like that would be like a clear point of like there's a change happening again right now.
Yeah, I'm just saying like the pattern of this kind of situation is you got to keep the news cycle busy all the time. It's part of the strategy. Like the sense that you have of, I can't really respond to this because every second there's something new and I don't understand like what's going on. I just want to wait for the dust to settle, is not coincidence. It's the strategy.
Sure, I'll agree with that. Like you could say like that's a strategy in Israel, let's say. Okay, you could say like the poison machine, that's what they're doing. Their tentacles don't reach though. Like, are they also playing the game in Syria and what's happening with Ukraine and Russia? And with that, like, there's a limit also to what like there's other actors as well, right? You would agree that let's say tomorrow,
Syria, sure, but like I don't think the occurrences between Russia and Ukraine, like you would say, like let's not talk about the government right now because I'm waiting to see what Trump does with Ukraine, right? Like that's not so.
No, but you would agree with me though that let's say Trump's statement about let's say Gaza, right? That's a game changer. That changes the conversation also internally in this country. That also could have implications for policy.
I think it's a an event that has ramifications. I think that like I think we're doing the politics I'm talking right now. So
you're right. Forget it. We'll behave. We'll behave. We won't continue this conversation. Gilad, this has been lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll be in touch. Take care, buddy.
Bye.
Andrew?
What's poppin'?
Cow. It was the 51st state. Nebuch. I was going to say Nebuch, but you understand, like, King Hezekiah was, right? He was a potential Messiah. And he is under the rule of many other kings, and his power is very limited. So even if that was true, that doesn't necessarily mean so much. And I disagree with this completely that we're a 51st state. There's obviously a relationship over there, but no, I don't think we're a 51st state. So yeah, Andrew, you okay? Family's okay? Parents are okay?
Big chillin'.
That's one way of answering. Yes, my parents are doing okay. They're big chilling.
Yeah, they're chilling. Don't worry.
Okay, I'm glad to hear that. It is always great to listen to Gilad. Many good ideas. Let me just look at some comments over here.
Mm-hmm. So what are the 8 chapters about? Are they a commentary on Pirkei Avot? Are they an introduction? What are they?
It would really be no, not a commentary. It's an introduction. It's Maimonides' introduction, and then when you read Pirkei Avot, even though we did the other way around, when you read Pirkei Avot, a lot of the things we're discussing right now you would read them into how the rabbis are. Well, Maimonides would say when the rabbis are saying these things in the Ethics of Our Fathers, the software they're running is what I'm explaining right now in the 8 chapters. Right? So when they're talking about evil, you have to bear in mind the different kinds of evil, the philosophers, the rabbis, how they looked at it, what they spoke about it. So like all that needs to be condensed into then when the rabbi says, and he gives an example from Avot, he says, who is the one that is a hero, one that could conquer his evil inclination. Then the assumption is you are aware of, let's say, the 8 chapters that Maimonides goes and talks about these ideas. Specifically, let's say, on the 6th chapter, talks about a little in the 3rd chapter about the concepts of evil. But so it's an in-depth introduction.
Mm-hmm.
I see Yoav and Yon God are having a lovely discussion between themselves, and that's fantastic, and I love that. Also, congratulations to Yon for, I think he proposed, right? That's very exciting. He's going to be getting married one day. May he be a fantastic husband and have a fantastic wife and life. I think language is actually pictures. I remember a pastor telling me how the English read the Bible as one of the Psalms was referring to dog chewing on a bone. The picture changed me. And how the English. I'm not fully understanding this. You could feel free to jump on and explain if you'd like. I don't know what the argument is about. I see. Good. I see you're really connected over here, Andrew. You really know what's. Well, guys, come on. Andrew's chilling, yo. Okay, that's the answer. RJ, a place to discuss things like it would be great. Maybe isn't this the place to discuss these things? And there is service. Go into Jacob's channel on Jacob's Ladder. Discuss away. Discuss away. There is no Chizkiah, and we're subject. There is no Hezekiah, and we're subject to whims of others. Those comments directly undermine the sovereignty of Israel. Which comments directly undermine the sovereignty of Israel? About what he said about Gaza, you're saying? Can you give Andrew an example of who Rambam was writing to for with regards to the guide of the perplexed? Okay, so I'll address that in a second. Andrew, RJ wants you to know that the guide was written to the perplexed. The perplexed is someone that is at the time of Maimonides, someone that is engaging with the, whether looking at different religions or different philosophies or different ideas out there, and on the surface, those ideas seem to clash with the ideas of the Torah. So hence that person would then be perplexed. And then Maimonides says, so for you, I have a guide, right? Or he was at the time going to call it he references it in the 8 books as the Book of Prophecy. He never ends up writing the Book of Prophecy and ends up writing the Guide to the Perplexed around 20 years later. But that is a discussion he's having with someone that is trying to understand these ideas. And even there, he writes it in code and says that I'm going to contradict myself because only someone that's truly initiated is going to read these and fully understand what I'm talking about. So that is the perplexed. And my argument is, which I discussed with RJ, is today we're living in a generation where many of us are perplexed because just in our schooling and the environment, we're already introduced and exposed to so much information out there. And the fact that there's just the educational level has grown tremendously. So you can't expect someone that studies evolution to then also not be perplexed with the story of Genesis if he doesn't have the right tools to guide himself through that. So that was that explanation. And I'll be with you in a second, Ethan. With regards to what Cal is saying and the immediate symbolic response to it from the Israeli religious world, you'll have to explain more. But do I think it's undermining Israel, the sovereignty of Israel, when Trump comes and says about Gaza? You have to assume back room, closed room conversations about optics, how things should be said. If it's being said like this, again, you could be like, he's a loose cannon. But Israel obviously does its own thing ultimately. And that is also part of the tension Israel is in right now, right? If you want to be part of the big boys and you want to participate in the game of nations, right? When we come to the land and we're offered, if you want to take a king, look around at the nations around you. So if you want to do that game, obviously we're going to have to fit into a certain mold. I think we're failing by not showing the world how to actually govern. And you're saying it's the right-wing reaction. I don't know what you think the right-wing reaction was to that. And I don't know how you would even define right-wing. And even if you're going to say that the right-wing was excited about removing Gazans from Gaza, even that you would have to understand. Which Gazans do they want to remove? Do they want them to come back? Can they come back if there's peace? So it's a lot, Cal. But you could obviously... We could discuss that if you wanted to, but that requires you to jump on, Cal, which you have yet to do. Ethan, welcome. I hope you're doing well. I've seen your face around in the last week when you joined us in these deep, warm waters, and I hope you are enjoying yourself. I hope you're enjoying this experience so far.
Yeah, it is so cool to be able to enter these different rooms and learn from people and hear discussions that have been going on and then be invited into it and just given the opportunity to ask questions. I'm super grateful for that. How do I respectfully pronounce your name?
My name is Chezi. People pronounce it as cheesy because you have a hard time saying that sounds.
I do.
But it's Chezi. If it's easier, you could call me Zeke, which is short for Ezekiel. That's what my name means. But yes, that's the name. But no offense, it could be cheesy. Don't even think about it. It's all good. All love.
I'll go with Zeke. So I was curious. I only listened just the last little bit of you and Jacob talking. But one of the things I thought was interesting, well, I don't know, it came to mind. So I wanted to hear your thoughts. I think the Hebrew word is something like Haggah, which
Again, I'm sorry, I was distracted for a second. Again,
I think the Hebrew word is something like Haggah.
for what?
Haggah. It
No,
gets
but what?
translated as. Sorry.
Yeah.
The word read in English, like one of the words that's translated as read in English, I think is actually a Hebrew word. I think it's Haggah.
It's to pronounce. Lahagot is to pronounce. It's not really to read. Read is likra. Reading out loud would be pronouncing, and be lehagot. Like pronouncing God's name would be lehagot et Shem Hashem. Haggah.
And what struck me is that, like, and this has happened a lot of times, is that I'll read something in English and then I'll try to like go to like some kind of English Hebrew dictionary, which I mean, it only gets me a little bit closer, but whatever like that Hebrew word is always has like a greater richness than the English word. And so there's like one Hebrew word and that'll get split up into like 7 different English words. And I've been kind of wondering, like, do you think that different languages, I don't know, create a different kind of consciousness to some degree?
1000%.
Because I've been trying to like take the little steps that I can to, I mean, I hope it's okay to say, like, to approach a Hebrew consciousness, because it seems like the way I think about words in English and language, I end up kind of like thinking like a machine or like logical sequences. And when I read the Bible, like, I don't think anyone that was writing the Bible thought like that at all.
So a fantastic insight. I mean, just off the bat, like in the Bible, right? In a English version of your Bible, you're going to have capital letters, right? There are no capital letters in Hebrew. So like off the bat, you're talking about like, it's not even a translation. It is an interpretation at that point. And much gets lost, unfortunately. But the idea that the words themselves create worlds, and the way you're going to use those words are going to create different worlds. We of course have to take that into consideration, and really, we are used to, like, we were going to have another class where we'll see if it is happening with another Orthodox Jew in our little corner named Yosef, really a marvel of a man. And we were going to do a reading, a verse by verse reading of Genesis. But when we were going to do this reading of Genesis, we were going to explain how, just like the word world or olam or forever, they have like today we're fast and loose with how we use these terms, and each one has this distinct understanding and meaning in Hebrew, and that will lead to, there will be ramifications with how you understand the story, of course. So I think it's very important to try to understand it. And I would argue, if you're trying to understand the Word of God, right, the revealed Word of God, understanding it in its original language would be very important. The Talmud already 2,000 years ago is aware of this tension. And for example, one of the languages you are allowed to write the Bible in is Greek, because it's known that it comes from the tense of Japhet, and it's known as one of the most beautiful languages, because Judaism recognizes the beauty of this language. And that's why they're saying, if the divine word is going to be written not in its original language, which is its core, then at the very least it should be written in the most beautiful language possible. But having said that, when it was written in Greek, and the Septuagint was written in Greek, there was a sense of a large cry, and we realized the second that happened, there was already a lost in translation moment. I'm just going back to something that Ups wrote over here. I was talking about there's a rabbi named Joseph Son, yes, who wrote a work called Sefer Elim, right? The Book of Gods. I can only find original Hebrew. Do you know if there are any library where I could check for an English translation? I doubt we're going to find one of that cycle, but let me write this down for a second to note myself to look for this. Harris. Okay. Grammar is hard. Yes. RJ. I'm going to have to defend Absalom. Okay. Yeah. Absalom. Very sad story how he dies. He was also a Nazarite with his long hair, which ends up being his undoing. I doubt. Okay. You find yourself work in English right now. I'm almost sure its most recent reprint is in Hebrew, like 50 years old. Right. Okay. So that was my saying. We'll see if I can find something. You and Yosef walking us through Genesis would be amazing. By the way, Ups had a question above, right? We saw that. Thank you very much. Okay. So yeah, we'll have to see if that Yosef thing happens. That will be very interesting, reading all those stuff. And just obviously the few verses of Genesis are obviously like, it could be months while we go through that. But yeah, what else is on your mind, Ethan, in this little magical corner?
I don't know that I have that much.
I'll engage you with another question. But Chezi, what was that about the red heifer Rambam mentioned? I was listening to catch up. Maimonides at the time where what you're talking about, RJ, he's talking about. We gave this distinction between the chukim and the mishpatim. Or the statutes and the laws, some are from with a divine decree, which we don't have intellectually we can't understand why would we do this, and there's other things which make sense, right? They make what the prophets were talking about. These are universal ideas, and that's why we could rationally understand them as well. And then he gives an example how even Solomon, who knew the reasons behind all the commandments, even he was still eluded, or it managed to elude him the deep meaning of the red heifer. That was the reference over there. We've spoken about that in a separate place, RJ, how I told you my friend was involved with bringing the red heifers from Texas to Shiloh right now, where they're growing these red heifers, and the rabbis are actually relearning the laws of the red heifer. And our sages say that when the laws of the red heifer will be learned again and be refined, this is a sign that we're in the Messianic age, which you guys all know that I believe that we've already reached redemption. However, that's only the starting point. So hearing my friend literally go to Texas, bring a red heifer, and then deal with the rabbis with this stuff, to me is obviously mind-blowing that we're living through these times. So that was the red heifer reference. Wait, Chezi, when are you starting this with Yosef? We don't know. We were supposed to start already, and then life got in the way. So we're gonna try to still do this. I have to see what day it's gonna be, but when we know, we'll let everyone know. Chezi, yeah, we want you and Yosef on the Genesis stream from the summer to circle as baby. Okay, sure. Random question, but what do you think of Rav Zevin's Moadim b'halacha? Oh, I got you. Moadim b'halacha. Learning it now. The chavrusa with a friend. See, I'm not against Zionim. He means he's not against Zionism. Cal is from a different Orthodox denomination, which is doesn't see Zionism, loaded term. We'll call it religious Zionism. And for this conversation, you'll assume all the bad things are not relevant, right? I'm saying he doesn't see Zionism as necessarily another stage in the redemption of the Jews or the Jewish story. Rather, they see it actually as a stumbling block. I would argue that we could synthesize those ideas, which is the current Zionism, the way it manifests, is a stumbling block because it hasn't fully emerged in what it could be. But that stumbling block itself is still on the path towards redemption. But I don't want to be splitting hairs. But nevertheless, he's learning them. And what do I think about them? I think it is definitely a solid book. It's written well. It's engaging. if you want to read a great series, it's Rav Tzvi Rimon on halacha. He has fantastic stuff. By the way, I still say that I'm definitely much not towards the middle when it comes to Zionism. I think it's very difficult to ignore the miracles of the establishment of the state. That's what I'm talking about, Cal. Correct. Ethan, I often say over here that I believe that 1948, the establishment of the state of Israel, was a theological smack in the face to our Christian brothers and sisters and Muslim brothers and sisters, because the Bible became alive. You guys are not supposed to come back. What is happening over here? And this is, this, to me, this crescendos with the Pope, the Vatican, coming out in 2015 with a statement saying that, a bonker statement, that Jews do not need salvation through Christ. They get their salvation through the Torah. This is a mystery that we don't understand how this is possible. Nevertheless, God's promises, you can't, they're irrevocable. And we should stop with trying to proselytize them. Bananas, crazy, right? This also means you might get, if you were here long enough, you'll get to know that I and others are involved in something called the Noahide movement as well. The 7 Noahide laws. So to me, and I already categorize Christians, almost all of them, as Noahides already. And so I don't see a built-in tension between us. I just see love to another person who wants to connect to the divine and to the Father. And that's beautiful. And I would argue that at this day and age, and definitely in this little corner, since we both can't be Israel, it's more like brothers searching for each other in the garden, trying to hold hands. And that requires a lot of bravery, right? We call this a brave space instead of a safe space. But it requires both parties to examine themselves and understand how there's cross-pollination as these religions have grown, and we have to be sensitive to that. And as Maimonides, and we often quote, Maimonides sees both Islam and Christianity as path makers for the Messiah. So that's why this is just, as I say, it was 1948 was a theological slap in the face, which I understand that could sound as like a little aggressive or combative. I'm making sure you understand the context of love and inclusion.
Can I ask you about the seventh commandment of the Noahic covenant? What is established courts of justice?
Oh, what a good question. Okay, so establishing courts of justice, which is why I claim that it's only relevant to have a discussion with regard to the 7 Noahide laws once you have the state of Israel, because they need to have a reference sort of point, right? Who are these courts of justice that I'm connecting to, right? And we know that the Noahides can't establish their own religion, right? So it's not like Noahides open up their own country and saying so there has to be a reference point. However, the idea is that if you want to take on some sort of societal organization, not stealing, how are these things going to happen, right? You have to have your Noahide rabbis. You have to have your Noahide judges. You have to have people that understand the system and work along with that system and create safeguards for that culture. Now, what's interesting is, because we want and desire the beautiful diversity that God has blessed us with in this world, I'm not expecting the Christian Noahide to be the same as the Muslim Noahide or the Hindu Noahide. They come from different cultures and they have different flavors. And Judaism, or really the path, or humanity, will lose if we all become cookie cutter, enter in the story of Babel, right? We can't all do the same thing right now. Instead, there needs to be, when I talk about the divine and the Muslim talk about the divine, assuming we cleaned off the mistaken theologies, nevertheless, there's a truth over there that became evident through that process, and not through the language, let's say through the Greeks or through the Jews, rather through Islam, through Ishmael it became, and we shouldn't deny that or ignore that. It will only benefit us to better understand God. Now, so that's why their culture and their courts of laws and their systems are built for their culture. So we could argue that in Judaism, I take on the commandments at the age of 13, right? You could say that for the drunken college kid in America that is still doing beer pong, right? Maybe you should accept the 7 Noahide laws when you're 21. But if you live in I don't know, somewhere in India and you are already working the land at the age of 7, I could probably have you take on the commandments also at 13. But it's going to change based on the culture and where I'm at.
Super random question. So, like, sometimes a positive commandment overrides a negative commandment. So, is there any idea that for justice in general, you can, God forbid, violate one of the other 7?
Yes. I mean, there's a concept in Judaism, et lasot laHashem haferu toratecha. When there's a moment when I need to truly sanctify God's name, it might even require me to transgress in a certain sense. We spoke about this actually in the 5th chapter of Maimonides right now, when we're talking about what is like a transgression for heaven's sake in a certain sense. However, those waters of transgressions for heaven's sake is very dangerous, very slippery slope, obviously, right? I need to sleep with 7 women because this is for God. You very quickly could take this to different somewhere else. And that's why the only time that kind of move was being practiced is during the prophets, right? When Elijah is battling the false prophets of Baal on the mountain, right? He builds a altar. However, we're not allowed to build an altar outside the temple. But he understands there's a bigger thing happening over here, right? Like right now I'm going to be sanctifying God's name and I'm challenging people that are challenging him. So for all intents and purposes, I need to build this altar right now. However, we lack the discernment of the prophets, right? We want to get back to that, getting back to the imaginal, coming back to prophecy. But I would say we should be aware that exists. And when I say we, the decisors, rabbis that are shaping halacha or Jewish law, maybe they don't have the authority yet to do that move, but they should be aware that move exists. And at the very least, that should change the tone of the rigidity when they're talking about reforming or changing in Jewish law, right? Like that's in the context of, we know now clearly, right, that Maimonides' books were burnt and they're like, he's a heretic, but now everyone learns Maimonides. And we know that the Ramchal, again, in Jewish thought, was kicked out of his home, right? One of the biggest rabbis of that community said the guy's out of his mind, kick him out of his house, him and his family, it's all garbage. No one knows that rabbi's name today because history realized that that's not relevant. And this guy that we chased out of the garden into the field, ultimately, his Torah is taught everywhere. So we should be very careful in today's day and age ostracizing someone or saying he's out of whack, because we already know that it could be 100 years later, we're going to be singing his praises. So we should just be very careful. What is this? I see Yov sent me about the original Chezi. Who's the original Chezi? Oh no. They found out the truth about me.
Ezekiel.
Back when I was dancing. The original Ezekiel. Yeah. I'm actually excited for you, Ethan, because like there's still so much of this little corner you need to explore. So many little side room, so many channels. But I do honestly think that it is the best place to be, because you're witnessing. I sometimes talk about this from the outside because it's different in Judaism, but like I'm witnessing like this beautiful discussion within Christianity right now, like the different denominations, these challenges of each other, and it really will only refine Christianity. And my hope is that it will, it will remove layers of the shell that are no longer relevant culturally, or they're always wrong, and allow for a truth to emerge. I believe that that truth ultimately will coincide with Judaism, but I think we're in a process. So
let me ask you another question. This comes from the Noahide Wikipedia. So, but there's something on here about Maimonides saying that apparently Gentiles should refrain from studying the Torah.
such a good question. Such good questions, Ethan, today.
What does that mean for me?
What does that mean for you? It's a great question. What does it mean? It means, I'm trying to think, how do I want to answer this question? Okay. We were told that we're not allowed to write down the oral Torah. That was a decree. No writing down the oral Torah, right? The second you write it down, it gets ossified and then it's no longer living. Don't do it. Big no, don't do it. But then Judah the Prince, who had fantastic conversations with, who's the philosopher, emperor, with
Marcus Aurelius.
Marcus Aurelius, correct. That's by the way, that's like an archetype of how those conversations are supposed to happen eventually. That was like at its ideal, it's Judah the Prince and Marcus Aurelius having these conversations. But he decided, he's like, look, I'm looking around at the people around me. I understand this decree, but everyone's forgetting the Torah. Right? People are working, people are dying, there's wars, there's pogroms. I can't be keeping all this information in my head right now. We got to write it down. And they decided to write it down. Then there was a decree, okay, we're writing it down, but no one could charge money for teaching the Torah. Okay? Not cool. And then they decided, hey, no one's teaching Torah. We got to pay them. And they're like, okay, we could pay them, but let's not be crazy. We're not teaching Torah to women, though, right? That's bananas. And then we decided, you know what? We got them. We have to teach Torah to women. We're talking about Deborah the prophet, Miriam the prophet. These women are rock stars. I would even say that the 7 female prophets are actually, besides Moses, are more powerful than all the male prophets, more intuitive. That's also why we have an issue with witches as well, though, right? They play with the force more intuitively, but that could lead to issues. And then we had an issue, which is we don't teach Torah to Gentiles. And that's what I do now on my off time, right? We're doing that right now. We're talking Torah right now. So how is this happening? A, I would say because the time has come. But B, and when you read Maimonides, the idea is don't teach Torah to a Gentile. A Noahide isn't a Gentile. A Noahide is a Noahide, right? And there's the Talmud gives I quote the Talmud saying sometimes, he who denies idol worship is called a Jew. And the idea is like, once you understand that it's not the man in the sky, you're basically with us already. You have to think about it. For 2,000 years ago, Judaism, the goal was like, everyone, we're the way, we got the right path, this is what God wanted, and no one cared, right? We did our own thing. And suddenly in a very short amount of time, boom, everyone becomes Christian, right? And Christians are just means Christos, Messiah, right? So they become Messianists. And then you have another 2 billion Muslims, which become God-fearers. Judaism, like, won. Like, you did it. Like, everyone got on it. They're like, yep, this is it, right? So, and just because it happened, and we know about this from psychology, right? Like, I could be close to 40 right now, but things that happened in my childhood could still be affecting me today, right? So it doesn't matter if it happened 10 years ago. So even if it happened 2,000 years ago, I don't think Jews even, like, the light bulb didn't go off. They're like, everyone actually did do that shift. Like 2,000 years ago, everyone was like, you know what? We are going to do that. So that's like a huge move. Now, if I'm talking to someone that wants to learn more and understand more about the God, the Father, Hashem, then it's indicative of me to, yes, engage with him and teach him. Now, for years, we were running away. People are killing us, running after us. There wasn't even the bandwidth to even deal with that discussion, because right now I'm making sure that my son isn't being killed in a pogrom. I'll teach Joe the Christian when I'm not running for my life, right? I can't be busy talking to him about Torah when I'm running. We've gotten to a place now where we finally can now put on our universal hat or our suit. We have our religious name, which is Jacob. We have our national name, which is Israel, and we have our universal name, which is Jeshurun. Jeshurun is our universal way we express Judaism, which we couldn't do for a very long time. But now our job is to express that. And when we're expressing that, that also means, of course, talking to the Gentiles of the world. Now, I would argue that when talking to Gentiles or Noahides, there is Torah that is specific to Jews within the context of their culture, and there's Torah for everyone. So it would be a mistake for me to start talking to you now about the secrets of Jewish mysticism, like Kabbalah, because there's no frame of reference, and that would be a mistake, and it could cause issues and confusion. So be wary. However, that doesn't mean that if in 5 years from now you and I are in this discussion, I can't now I could start discussing that because you understand more. And our sages say, don't teach what's not necessary, but you could teach anything that's necessary. But it's very gray because understanding God, I could say like everything's necessary to understand God, right? So there's sort of like a back door that you could teach. And the question is, who are you teaching? What's the context you're in? There is a sense which is, it's sort of stealing, right? If the Gentile's learning it, he's learning Torah, he's learning things that are not his. That's only true if he's not interested in using that software. But if you're interested on running Judaism, iOS, then of course, my job is then to make sure that you learn and study and understand. So I would say that that's like, that's I hope that wasn't too cumbersome. But now there's division within Judaism and the rabbis, which is how many commandments can the Noahide take on? Is it 7? Is it 30? Is it 100? Can he take on all the commandments? There's disagreement. Everyone agrees that they can't put on phylacteries and they can't write some other parchment thing. But there are rabbis that say besides that, they could basically do everything if they wanted to. There are issues which is like, if a Noahide is keeping all the commandments and dressing like a Jew, there's a question is like, why won't you convert at that point? Not that everyone needs to convert. You don't need to convert. It's very much like you could reach a higher level of spirituality than the high priest. You don't need to be Jewish. That's number one. If you want to act exactly like a Jew, then you could be Jewish, because what we don't want is, I don't want Sarah walking into temple, checking out Ethan, saying, Ethan's awesome, I'm going to start dating Ethan. And then like mid-date, she realizes, what? Ethan's not Jewish, but he talks like a Jew and looks like a Jew. And so one has to be careful about that as well. We don't want there to be like a new religion emerging, which is like, we are this other thing. So and that's why Maimonides, not all agree with this. For Maimonides, it's super important. If you keep the 7 Noahide laws because you're just a rational dude, then you're considered part of the wise men of the nations of the world. But that doesn't promise you a place in the world to come. If you want the place in the world to come, you need, according to Maimonides, you need to keep the 7 because Moses commanded it. You got to tether yourself back to Revelation. Super important for Maimonides. Other sages, other heavy hitters don't have that requirement. But for Maimonides, it's very, very important. They're like, you're not doing this because you're moral. You're doing this because the master of the universe commanded you to do so. The fact that it's moral, great, awesome. Chezi, what is going on over here? Chezi, why not now? What will surely come tomorrow? Avshalom. Yeah. Christ doesn't technically mean Messiah, but that's a long story full of heresy and stuff. It's complicated. I love those like old school Nokia emojis. V'ishman Yesharun ve'ivat. Correct. That is the reference. That's the verse reference. Okay. I have to ask, what are your thoughts on the Karaites? My thoughts on the Karaites are like what I think about the ultra Orthodox today. Unfortunately, there will be bifurcations again. And it's scary. It's also sad because I don't know. Again, this is just the way I see it. To me, there's a demand to participate in the living Torah, and participating in the living Torah is being aware of what came before me, but taking part of establishing Cal's having a hard time with this. Come on, man. I'll just remind Cal of the famous story of the Talmud of Lo Bashamayim, right? The rabbis, even though they heard the heavenly voice agreeing with one rabbi, nevertheless, they said, that's very nice. But once it left Sinai, we could play with it. We're allowed to play with this Torah, because if it's always tethered back to then it can never move. It can never change. And that's not what God wants. I don't believe that's what God wants, at least. What God wants is how that story ends, right? When God takes Moses time traveling, part of a different story, but God takes Moses time traveling. And he takes Moses and he sits in the classroom of Rabbi Akiva, great rabbi, great sage. And he's on the back row and he has no flippant idea what's flying. And we're talking about Moses, right? This is like the heaviest hitter. He doesn't know what's going. And he loses faith because like his power, he's like, oh my God, like I think I'm Moses. Like I have no flippant idea what these guys are talking about. And they're presumably talking Torah. And one of the students asks, how do we know this, Rabbi? And the rabbi answers back, we know this because this is a tradition from Moses from Sinai. And the second Moses hears that, his heart rests, because he realizes, right, that I might not understand what they're talking about it, but it's rooted in what I started with. It's rooted with what I taught. And as long as they are still connecting those dots, then I don't have to understand the 2025 Torah they're talking about. I just need to know that its root is rooted in revelation. It's rooted in my Torah. And that's why the Karaites are saying, we want the GoPro of what Moses saw, and that's the only thing we're interested in experiencing. And I would argue the Talmud already tells us that's not what you're supposed to be experiencing. You're supposed to be experiencing Torah 2025, powered by 3,000 years, 4,000 years of tradition. But we're in a dynamic world. Oh, Jason's here. What's up, Jason? Jason is a fantastic man. I hope you're doing well. I hope you and the missus are doing well. I'm not disagreeing, but it applies to everyone. I'm not sure you have any issue with them because they or we are practicing calcified Judaism. I think it's more to do with the current political issues in Israel. No, this is true. This is true to Jewry in America, in the diaspora as well. I very much believe there needs to be change. That change has to happen in a proper way, but there needs to be change. All right. Any other questions? Complaints?
I feel so bad, Hazi. You know, you asked me how I was doing, and then I was just kind of caught up in my thoughts, and I never asked you back. Like, how's it been? You know, how's the family? How's the move?
Family, thank God, is doing well. The move is amazing. Living next to my brother in a beautiful new community is a fascinating experience. I hope I get. The ideal is to try in this new community to do like a microcosm of like what the nation of Israel potentially could do. I hope, because there's differences of opinions, and it's a great place to see where people can meet. So on that end, it's great. Then, like on a national level, obviously, there's a tremendous amount of turmoil. My heart aches constantly for my brothers and sisters that are in captivity. It's very, very difficult. It's very difficult to see. My employee, we just sent him on vacation for a week, but like the last 8 months, he's been in reserves, right? So like, what that does to parents, to fathers, to relationships. So there's a lot of trauma here, and unfortunately, there's a lot of infighting. But I think that's sort of the game, right? I feel like God has done plenty of moves already, and if we wanna be serious, we got to ante up. But so far, it seems like the nation of Israel is constantly stumbling. Chazi and Hasidim Haredim in the community. Oh, are there Hasidim Haredim in the community, or are you guys trying to get any? Hasidim and Haredim are, let's say, on the more, right wing or ultra Orthodox observant Jews. I would say Haredim. I would use the term yeshivish cow. I would say, let's say on the far right, you have people that are yeshivish coming from the States here. On the far left, you would have something called Datlash, which is an acronym for someone that used to be observant. However, they're different than fully secular. So there's people, for example, that live in my community that don't wear the skull cap, and there's many commandments that they don't observe, yet it's very important for them that their kids are in that culture. So let's say they join the Bible classes, they come on Sabbath for the prayers. They want to be, now they don't mind also talking during prayer time, because there's a level of disconnection. Nevertheless, they want to be involved. So I would say like that would be like on the far left to the far right. So yeah, it's diverse. It could be more diverse, I guess, but it's pretty diverse. And different challenges. Like my brother, he's a rabbi. So his sons, there's like these youth groups, sort of like the Boy Scouts. Okay. So he was in a youth group in his previous neighborhood that was segregated. Like, it was just boys and girls. In the community here, the vote decided to take the religious and observant youth group, but one that is integrated. It's co-ed. So that's a different dynamic for my brother, who's now dealing with his 15-year-old son participating in co-ed activities, right? Or like now these girls want to hang out and they want to text him. So like he has to see like how he maneuvers that. Now it's he wants to live in a world, and we were talking about this in Maimonides, right? There's one level of piousness, which is like, I'm removing myself from any possibility of transgressions. So I'm not going to even talk to the women, and I'm just going to be in my house. I'm going to do my thing. And that will allow me to not be distracted and reach high levels of spirituality. That's true. The level on top of that, though, is called the saint, the kadosh. He is one that could integrate everything, right? I could drink the beer and learn the verse, right? They're not two different worlds. I could integrate all these worlds together. That's difficult to do, though. Scary to do, to integrate worlds together. And that is what my brother would be attempting to do. It comes with its own challenges, of course. Cal asks, where is it located? It is located in the Elah Valley, where David fought Goliath. The name of the community itself is Eden Hills, or Gvaot Eden. That's the name of it. It's between all these different wineries. It's 10 minutes from Beit Shemesh, the house of the rising sun, where Samson is from. And what else is there in that region? The grave, the tomb of Dan, the patriarch, right? The son of Jacob is there. Well, people argue it's not that one, but there's a Dan there. So that's a space. Anyone listening that's politically inclined, it's within the 1967 borders of Israel, right? So it's not a settlement. I know Yohan was asking about that before, even though I have my parents and my sister live in a settlement in Efrat, one that on the way to Rachel's tomb and the tomb of the patriarchs. The main road, one of the main roads in their settlement is called the Path of the Patriarchs, because there's a high probability that's literally where the patriarchs were doing their thing, right? Which is kind of like bananas. So yeah, so there, if anyone that wanted to throw some shade on me politically, I just giving you ammo. We're settling lands. All right. Looks like the questions have ended. Ethan, anything else?
If it's possible, can I come visit you sometime next year?
In Israel, if you come, you are welcome to visit. There's a guest room. We're in the guest room right now. So the guest room is already set up. You have your own little area, your own bathroom. It's a beautiful place, and I will be happy for you to come visit. And that can include various different things. It can include, I want to participate at a Shabbat meal. I want to come with you to services. I want to just go. Give me a list of cool places to go. You got it, buddy. Chazi, will you do a Pesach stream, a Passover stream, discussing the Passover? Maybe. We'll see. We'll see how much work I got done. Thank God work is busy. And even though I will gladly cheat on work with Torah because it is my value, a balance is necessary. All right. It is a quarter to 11. I'm going to enjoy myself with one of my vices. Take care, guys. Peace.
Have a good one.
So nice.